I first saw the house when the streetlight flickered once, twice, then went out completely. It sat at the end of Hollow Street like a shadow frozen in time, its windows' dark eyes staring at anyone who dared pass. I didn't plan to stop, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe unease, made me pull over, the engine idling softly in the cold night air. The smell of wet leaves and damp brick hit me first. There was a heaviness to the air, thick and still, like it had been waiting. The gate hung crooked on its hinges, groaning faintly when I pushed it. Each step toward the house felt like a whisper against my own skin. I could see the peeling paint, the ivy crawling across the walls, and the front porch sagging as if it carried the weight of 100 untold stories. The wood of the porch creaked under my boots, and I wondered if anyone had ever walked here since the family left, or if time itself had been keeping the house's secrets locked inside. I raised my flashlight, letting its beam stretch across the front door. Faded brass doorknobs rusting in place reflected the weak light in a dull glimmer. There were scratches along the wood, small, deliberate marks that might have been a child's attempt at mischief or something else entirely. My hand trembled slightly as I touched the door, expecting it to resist, but it swung open without complaint. Inside, the air smelled of dust and mildew, with a hint of something else I couldn't name. Smoke, maybe, or rot. I stepped inside. The hallway was narrow, lined with wallpaper that had curled and yellowed, almost like skin peeling from the walls. My flashlight flicked across old portraits. Faces stared back at me, some happy, some grim, all frozen in a way that made my stomach tight. I felt eyes on me, I realized, not just from the paintings but from the shadows themselves. Something in the darkness moved when I wasn't looking directly at it, just enough to make me second-guess each breath. The stairs groaned as I climbed. Each step echoed in the silence, like a reminder that I was not supposed to be here. The air felt colder on the second floor, heavier. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, and the rooms off it were mostly empty, stripped of furniture long ago. Yet the emptiness didn't feel vacant. There was a weight, as if memories had pooled here, thick and waiting, settling over every corner. I noticed a door at the end of the hall. Unlike the others, it was closed, its paint chipped but recent enough to suggest someone had touched it not long ago. I paused, listening. There was nothing, just the soft hum of the house settling, my own breathing, and maybe, just maybe, something else. Something small, distant, deliberate. I pressed my ear to the wood. A faint shift, almost imperceptible, like a quiet intake of breath. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I told myself it was nothing. Old houses make noises, that's all. The first room I entered was the old nursery. Faded wallpaper with pastel animals barely clinging to the walls. A crib stood in the corner, empty, its paint cracked and dull. Dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight, dancing slowly, mesmerizingly, until I caught a glimpse of something. A small shape in the corner, moving too quickly to be dust. I blinked and it was gone. My rational mind screamed that it was a trick of light, shadows playing against peeling paint. But my gut told me otherwise. I wasn't alone. There were footprints. Tiny, maybe child-sized, pressed into the thick layer of dust on the floorboards. They led from the corner toward the doorway, stopping just short of the hall. I crouched, running my fingers over them. They were real. I could feel the depression in the boards, faint but undeniable. The hairs on my arms stood straight and I swallowed hard. What had left these? And more importantly, why were they still here, as if someone had just walked through moments ago? I moved to the next room, trying to keep calm. The library. Its shelves sagged under the weight of books left to decay. Pages yellowed, curling, brittle. I pulled one from a shelf, the title faded beyond recognition. When I opened it, the first page was blank, but a small scrawl at the corner made me pause. "Do you see us?" I froze. The handwriting was childlike, uneven, yet deliberate. My fingers shook as I traced the words. The question was meant for me, I realized, though I had no idea why. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. Maybe the house had a history of pranks, or maybe some local kid had found a way in. But the weight of the silence pressed down on me, heavy and expectant. I could feel it in my chest, a pressure that made it harder to breathe. I walked to the window and peered outside. The street was empty, the fog curling around the lampposts. But across the street, the other houses stood dark, still, and yet I thought I saw a figure in the second-floor window, watching. No. That wasn't possible. I had driven past this street. There shouldn't be anyone here. The attic staircase caught my attention next. It was narrow and rickety, the kind of stairs you avoid at night. But the attic called to me as if the house itself was drawing me upward. Step by step I ascended, each creak a note in a song of warnings. The attic was empty, or so it seemed. Dust-covered trunks lined the walls, old fabrics spilling over. But the center of the room felt wrong. The air was colder here, and I could feel a presence, small and patient, like it had been waiting. Then I saw it. A rocking chair gently swaying, though there was no breeze. I froze. My rational mind clawed at me, whispering explanations, settling wood, vibration from traffic, but the motion was too consistent, deliberate. My flashlight flicked, and in the shadows I thought I saw the outline of someone small, watching. Not a shadow, not a trick. Something. A figure crouched near the beams, hidden, silent. I forced myself to take a step back. My heart thumped so loudly I thought it might echo through the floorboards, and yet I couldn't leave. Not yet. I needed to know. Why did the house feel alive? Why did it feel like I was intruding on a presence that was both playful and malevolent? Questions churned in my mind as I tiptoed around the rocking chair. A soft thump behind me made me whirl around. Nothing. Just the attic settling. Or so I told myself. By the time I returned to the main floor, the night had deepened. The shadows had grown, stretching and curling along the walls like living smoke. I moved toward the front door, intending to leave, but the air felt heavier, almost resistant. A soft whisper, almost inaudible, grazed my ear. "Don't go." My spine stiffened. I spun, flashlight shaking, and found nothing but the familiar emptiness of the hallway. I stepped outside at last. The gate swung shut behind me with a reluctant groan. The street was silent, but the sense of being watched didn't leave. I glanced back once. The windows of the Victorian house were dark again, but I could swear the faintest movement lingered behind one of them, just at the corner of vision. Something was there, something that had waited for me, something that might always be waiting. Driving away, the headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the cracked pavement and fallen leaves. Hollow Street shrank behind me, but the weight of the house followed. A question churned in my mind, gnawing at the edges of reason. Had I really seen the figure? Or had the house shown me what it wanted me to see? I knew even then that I would return. There were stories inside that house, stories that needed witnesses. And perhaps in some way I had become part of its history, whether I wanted to or not. The night swallowed Hollow Street, leaving me with only the echo of my footsteps, the memory of tiny footprints in dust, and a whisper that wouldn't fade. "We're still here." The first sound came from upstairs. A soft shuffle, almost like fabric brushing against wood, followed by a pause. I froze, heart catching, flashlight trembling in my hand. I hadn't moved anything. The air was still, but somehow heavy, pressing down as though the house itself was holding its breath. My ears strained, every tiny noise amplified. The hum of the old radiator, the distant creak of floorboards, everything was alive, waiting. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses make noises. Boards settle, pipes groan, wind sneaks through cracks. But then another sound, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hall I had just left. I swung the flashlight. Shadows sprawled across peeling wallpaper, stretching toward me like reaching fingers. I swallowed, forcing my pulse to slow, but my skin prickled with the knowledge that something was moving when it shouldn't. I moved cautiously toward the staircase, keeping the beam low, scanning the edges of the hallway. Dust rose from old floorboards, floating in the air like tiny specters. Every creak beneath my boots echoed like a warning. Another soft thump above. Not random. Someone or something was packing. The rhythm was steady, patient. My fingers grazed the banister, feeling its chill under my skin. I wanted to call out, to demand an explanation, but the words caught in my throat. Silence seemed safer somehow. Reaching the top of the stairs, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Small handprints pressed faintly into the dust along the hallway floor, leading toward the master bedroom. I knelt, brushing my fingers across them. They were fresh, or as fresh as dust could hold memory. Child-sized, delicate. My stomach churned. The house hadn't been inhabited for decades, at least according to the records I'd found. Who had left these prints? Or was it something else entirely? Pretending, lingering, leaving hints of presence. I followed them slowly. Each step made the floorboards groan, but the sound didn't mask the quiet patter above, almost matching my own movements. I felt an itch of anticipation mixed with fear. The footprints ended abruptly at a door. The paint was cracked and yellowed, the knob cold beneath my hand. I hesitated. Should I open it? Something told me I would regret it if I didn't, and regret it if I did. Finally, I turned the knob. Room was empty. Sunlight didn't reach here, the shadows thick and heavy in the corners. A single chair overturned. Dust settled on the floor in thick layers except for a small patch wiped clean. Someone or something had been here. My flashlight beam swept across the room, catching the edge of a journal, its leather cover cracked, lying under the window. I knelt, lifting it carefully. The pages were brittle, but inside were entries written in a hurried, uneven script dated decades ago. Names of children. Names that vanished from records. Dates that matched disappearances in the town newspaper. My pulse quickened. I flipped through more pages. A sentence caught me. They watch, they wait, they take only what they choose. I read it again. My mind struggled to anchor itself. These words had been written years ago, yet the footprints, the sounds, they felt alive, present. The journal was proof that something had lingered here, that the house held more than memory. It wasn't just abandoned, it was waiting, patiently, silently, for someone to notice. I stepped back toward the hallway. Another sound, lighter this time, almost like shuffling slippers across the wood. It moved fast, just a blur in the corner of my eye. I spun. Nothing. But the air was thick, charged. My skin prickled, my mouth dry. I realized the house wasn't just quiet, it was listening. Each breath I took echoed strangely, bouncing off the walls and ceiling. The weight of unseen eyes pressed in, not from malice but from expectation, as if I had entered a narrative long paused, now resumed. I explored the next room cautiously. A small parlor, the furniture covered in white sheets. Shapes like frozen people, frozen time. My flashlight flicked across the mantelpiece. A photograph leaned against the wall. I froze. The image was faint, sepia-toned, a family smiling, a child standing between them, eyes dark and unreadable. Something about the child's gaze made my stomach turn. The photo vibrated with quiet menace, as if it contained more than memory. I could feel it watching me, judging, measuring. Another sound. Footsteps below, slow, deliberate, echoing through the floorboards. I realized with sudden clarity that the sounds didn't belong to me. They were separate, synchronized with nothing but the house itself. My mind raced. Were these echoes of past residents, or something else entirely, mimicking the living, waiting for the right moment? I pressed my ear to the floor. The thumps paused. My heartbeat filled the silence. And then faintly, almost inaudible, a whisper. "Do you see?" I jumped back. The whisper wasn't angry or aggressive. It was patient, expectant. I could feel it curling around the edges of my consciousness. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, a loose board, my imagination, but deep down I knew it was. Something in the house knew I was here, and more disturbingly, it knew I was aware. I continued down the hallway. Each room revealed remnants of life, frozen and incomplete. A kitchen with rusted utensils left mid-meal. A bedroom with a broken rocking horse. A hall lined with doors, each closed, each hiding secrets I wasn't ready to uncover. And yet the echoes followed me. Footsteps on empty floors, soft shuffles, brief thumps, all synchronized in a rhythm I couldn't predict. I realized I was no longer just exploring. I was part of their pattern now. The attic staircase caught my attention. My first visit had left an uneasy impression, but tonight the whispers above seemed to draw me. Slowly, deliberately, I climbed. The air grew colder, heavier. Shadows pooled in corners, and I imagined eyes watching from the beams, small and patient. When I reached the top, the rocking chair swayed gently. No one was there, and yet the motion felt deliberate. And then I saw footprints in the dust leading away from the chair. Tiny, bare. They vanished into the darkness of the rafters. I followed them carefully. Something about the movement, the sound, was hypnotic. It drew me forward, deeper into the attic's shadows. I noticed a small cabinet tucked against the wall, its door slightly ajar. Inside, photographs, yellowed letters, toys, evidence of lives that had been abruptly abandoned. The letters mentioned names, dates, disappearances. A pattern emerged. The house had been keeping records, marking time, watching who came and went, who noticed, who stayed too long. The soft thump behind me made me spin. Nothing, my flashlight trembled, catching only dust and shadows. The air felt thick, vibrating with expectation. Another whisper, faint, brushing against the edges of my mind. Do you remember? My mind recoiled. Remember what? I hadn't lived here, hadn't known these people. And yet the question clung to me, a weight pressing into my thoughts. I descended slowly, careful not to break the rhythm, careful not to provoke whatever lingered. The hallway seemed longer than before. Footsteps echoed faintly behind me, keeping pace without ever overtaking. I glanced at the rooms I had passed, the nursery, the parlor empty, yet I could feel their presence stitched into the dust, the walls, the air itself. They were here, waiting, watching, and perhaps, I realized with a chill, learning. Reaching the front door, I paused. Outside, the street was empty, fog curling around the lampposts. Inside, the echoes persisted, faint, patient. I pushed the door open. The night air hit me, cold and damp, yet somehow lighter than the attic. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had left a mark on me. Footsteps, whispers, memories, not mine, now lingered inside my mind. Driving away, Hollow Street swallowed itself in mist and darkness, but the soft echoes followed. Each car vibration, each roadside crack, each passing shadow felt like an extension of the house. I thought about the journal, the footprints, the photographs. They weren't just remnants, they were messages, invitations, warnings. The house had been silent for decades, yet it spoke now, and it wasn't finished speaking. That night I lay in bed, hearing faint shuffles in the corners of my room. I told myself it was the floorboards, the wind, my imagination. But deep down I knew. Hollow Street had reached beyond its walls, and I would go back. I had to. The echoes of footsteps, soft and deliberate, had called me in, and they were patient enough to wait for me to answer. I found the door at the end of the hallway before I realized I was looking for it. Something drew me, an instinct I couldn't name, pulling me toward the peeling wood, the brass doorknob dulled by years of neglect. The air around it felt thicker, colder, almost alive. I pressed my palm to the wood, cold, unyielding, locked. Not rusted or broken, but sealed tight, like it had been meant to keep something inside or out. I crouched, examining the edges. Faded scratches traced random patterns along the frame, some deep enough to catch the light. They weren't haphazard. Letters, numbers. I traced them with a fingertip, trying to make sense. Something about the shapes pressed uneasily against my memory, familiar in a way I couldn't place. They were warnings or invitations. I didn't know which. I stepped back and circled the door. The hallway stretched in both directions, shadows pooling along the floorboards. The air carried a faint scent, old wood, dust, and something metallic. Copper, maybe, or blood. My stomach churned, but I forced myself closer. Something in the house wanted me to see this, and that knowledge made my pulse hammer. I noticed faint chalk markings along the floor leading from the door. Odd, almost childlike, some forming shapes I didn't recognize. I crouched again. Brushing them with my fingers, they left a powdery residue, a trail. Following it led me to a small closet nearby, its door ajar, revealing tattered linens and broken hangers. Dust motes floated lazily in the beam of my flashlight. The air was thick, yet still. Nothing moved, and yet I could feel a presence, like it was waiting, patient and silent, just behind the walls. My hand itched to force the lock, to know what secrets the room kept. But I hesitated. Fear wasn't the reason. The hesitation was respect, or maybe instinct. Something about the room felt sacred in a twisted way, like violating it could invite the house's gaze to fall entirely upon me. I crouched against the wall, studying the scratches on the doorframe. One mark stood out, a small spiral etched low, almost at the height of a child's hand. I leaned closer, heart hammering. The spiral pulsed faintly in my vision, a trick of the light perhaps, or something more. I tried the door again. Locked, no give. I pressed my ear to it, silence. Not complete silence, but a stillness that hummed faintly, vibrating in my chest. Then, almost imperceptibly, a whisper, soft, childlike, "Come in." My heart skipped. I pulled back, shaking my head. Not imagination, not the wind. Something inside that room wanted me to notice. wanted me to answer. I glanced down the hallway. Shadows seemed to ripple, shifting as though the walls themselves were breathing. The floorboards groaned under my weight, yet the room didn't creak. My rational mind tried to anchor me. The house was old, floors settled, hallways shrank or stretched in the dark. But the scratches, the whisper, the spiral, they didn't fit into reason. They belonged to someone or something that had been here long before me, and long after. I circled the hallway, flashlight catching a glint near the baseboard. A small key, rusted old with dried residue around the handle. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. Could this unlock the door? Or was it left as bait to lure me into curiosity too deep? I slid the key into the lock. The mechanism resisted, stiff with age. A soft click echoed like a sigh. The door shifted slightly. I could feel the air change, heavier now, as if the room exhaled in relief or anticipation. Slowly I turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a bedroom frozen in time. Dust hung in the air, catching the beam of my flashlight. A bed, its sheets yellowed and stiff, stood against the far wall. A dresser leaned slightly, drawers left half open, and on the walls words, faded, scrawled in a mixture of pencil and what looked like old charcoal. Names, dates, cryptic messages. She listens. Don't wake them. They remember you. I stepped inside, careful not to disturb the floorboards. The air was thicker here, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. My flashlight beam swept over the walls again. The words seemed to move in the corners of my vision, shifting subtly as if alive. I read them aloud softly, tasting their meaning, feeling the tension coil in my chest. They spoke of loss, of fear, of presence. They hinted at things that had been hidden for decades, left behind in haste or desperation. The bed caught my attention. A small, tattered doll lay on the pillow, its face cracked, eyes missing, yet somehow staring at me. My fingers itched to pick it up, and when I did, a faint, chilling vibration passed through my palm. A whisper, barely audible, brushed against my ear. "Do you see?" I dropped the doll, stepping back. It wasn't animate, yet it had felt alive. The room hummed with patience, as though observing my reaction, learning my fear, savoring my hesitation. I moved toward the dresser. Drawers squeaked as I opened them, revealing journals, faded photographs, and small trinkets, long abandoned. The journals contained frantic, jagged handwriting, notes about nights filled with shadows, children disappearing into corners of the house that seemed to shift when no one watched, strange patterns etched in walls, and whispers that didn't belong to any living voice. The pages hinted at a presence patient enough to wait decades, feeding on fear, observing, nodding who came close enough to notice. A soft thump from behind me made me whirl around. The room was still. The shadows clung to corners, stretching and pulsing faintly. My chest tightened. Something unseen was moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Another thump, this one deliberate, measured. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. The old house. The wind, my imagination, but none fit. The rhythm matched nothing natural. Someone or something was packing just out of sight, testing my attention. I noticed more marks on the walls, faint scratches near the corners. They formed a pattern I hadn't seen before, a spiral within a square, then a series of dots, almost like counting. A warning, a map, I couldn't tell. I traced one with my fingertip, feeling the depth, the history pressed into the wood and plaster. It resonated, almost vibrated under my skin. The room seemed to pulse around me, alive in a quiet, deliberate way. I backed toward the door, suddenly aware of the room's oppressive presence. Each step made the floorboards groan, yet the whispers persisted, low and constant. "Do you see? We remember. Don't leave." I realized the room wasn't just a space. It was a witness, a recorder, a trap. It wanted me to know, to participate, to recognize what had been hidden. And I understood, with a chill settling deep in my bones, that leaving might not be enough. At last I stepped back into the hallway. The door swung closed behind me with a soft sigh, locking itself once more. I pressed my ear against it, half expecting to hear movement inside. Nothing. Only silence, dense and expectant, but my pulse told me otherwise. The room had noticed me. It had recorded me, and it would wait, patient, watching. Perhaps it would speak again, perhaps it would remain still, but it had marked me now. I lingered in the hallway, flashlight trembling. The whispers followed, fading but never gone. The The weight of history pressed on me. Children who vanished, families who fled, secrets carved into wood and plaster. They were all here, lingering in layers I could barely perceive. The room hadn't released its story. It hadn't revealed the most important part. Something waited, hidden, patient, still. And I knew with an uneasy certainty that the next time I returned it would speak louder. I moved down the hall, every creak underfoot echoing like a drumbeat in my chest. Outside, the night pressed in against the windows, fog curling across the panes. Shadows clung to the corners, waiting, stretching, almost sentient. I glanced back at the locked room. Even from this distance, it seemed to breathe, the scratches faintly visible through the dim light. Something unseen had been recording me, noting my fear, measuring my hesitation. It would remember. That night I lay awake in a cheap motel, staring at the ceiling, hearing faint, rhythmic creaks in my mind. The door, the scratches, the whispers, they followed me. The locked room had opened in my imagination. I could feel it, patient, silent, waiting for my return. I couldn't escape it, not entirely. And I knew I would go back. Something inside demanded it. Something in the house still had unfinished stories to tell, and I had become part of them, whether I wanted to or not. The thought lingered, soft but insistent. The room waits, and next time I would answer. The house breathed at night, not in the ordinary way, with creaking floorboards or pipes groaning in protest. No, this was different. A slow, deliberate exhalation, like the walls themselves were alive, and I was inside something that waited. I sat in the hallway, notebook open, flashlight beside me, documenting what I'd already seen. The locked room, the faded writings, the footprints. But as I wrote, a whisper reached my ear. Soft, faint, almost like someone exhaling through the cracks of a wall. Why are you here? I froze. My pen hovered above the page. The voice was clear enough to send a shiver down my spine, but vague enough to make me question reality. Was it the house, echoing its own settling noises? Or was it something else waiting for my attention, drawing me in? The air felt thick. My fingers tingled. My heart beat loud in my ears, yet the hallway remained still, silent, unbroken. I whispered back, testing, "Who's there?" Nothing, only a faint shifting sound, almost like movement just beyond the beam of my flashlight. The shadows pooled differently now, stretching longer along the walls. I tilted my head, trying to catch any hint of a presence. A soft murmur again, this time beneath my breath. "Do you see us?" I blinked. Was it a trick of memory, the imagination of someone alone in a house too old to be friendly? My rational mind screamed for logic, drafts, settling wood, imagination. But my body betrayed me. My spine stiffened. Hairs raising as though the house had touched me. I stood, flashlight trembling, notebook clutched like armor, and moved slowly down the hall. Each step echoed differently than it should have. Floorboards creaked under my weight, yet I could hear another set of soft taps keeping pace behind me. Not always in sync, sometimes a beat ahead, sometimes a fraction behind. Someone or something was following, yet no one was there. I spun, flashlight sweeping, catching only dust and shadows. The beam illuminated peeling wallpaper, faint handprints pressed in grime, scratches curling like tiny questions. Nothing alive, yet the sounds persisted. I stepped into the parlor, the room I had explored before. Furniture hidden beneath white sheets, shadows dancing between the folds. The whispers multiplied, faint voices overlapping, laughter, sobbing, words I couldn't comprehend. I pressed my hands over my ears, tried to shut them out. But the house had begun speaking in layers, and I was the only listener. I felt the weight of years pressing down, decades of presence folded into the air. A soft footstep behind me made me whirl. Nothing. My flashlight illuminated only the carpet, dust motes spinning like tiny ghosts. I realized I had stopped breathing. The whispers flowed around me, curling, teasing, shifting. "Don't leave. We remember. Do you see them?" I sat on the edge of a chair, heart racing. Notebook open, hands trembling. I wrote down everything, hopping to anchor myself. The room was quiet for a moment. I exhaled slowly, telling myself I was imagining it, that the mind plays tricks when alone in silence. But then, a whisper so close it grazed my cheek. "Stop pretending." I froze. My pen fell to the floor. My flashlight swung wildly. Shadows in the corner of the room pulsed faintly, stretching and curling as though alive. I felt eyes on me. Not from a portrait, not from a shadow on the wall, but from nowhere and everywhere at once. I wanted to leave, to escape, but curiosity held me rooted. I had to know what the house was trying to tell me, what secrets were pressed into these walls. I moved toward the staircase. Each step was deliberate, careful. The whispers followed, shifting with me, changing pitch, forming words I almost understood. I could feel a rhythm now, a pattern like the house itself had a heartbeat and I was intruding into its pulse. A small voice, playful and eerie, said, "Come upstairs, they're waiting." I froze mid-step. Upstairs. I had explored the attic before. There was nothing there, or so I thought. The thought of returning sent a chill through me, yet I felt drawn. The whispers weren't merely sounds. They were invitations, directives impossible to resist. I climbed slowly, every groan of the staircase a warning, every shadow a moving finger pointing toward some hidden truth. At the top, the attic stretched before me, dark and cold. The rocking chair remained unmoving, yet somehow alive in the shadows. The whispers had changed tone, softer now, patient, almost coaxing. "See what we left behind, remember them." I swallowed hard. My flashlight beam caught something new, a small trunk partially open, a corner of old fabric poking out. I approached. Inside, letters, photographs, toys, journals, all evidence of lives abruptly abandoned. Each object told a story, but the most chilling detail was that some of the toys appeared recently touched, dust disturbed, footprints in the thin layer of debris. Not my footprints. Someone or something had been here since my last visit. The realization made my chest tight. The house wasn't empty. Not truly. It was patient, waiting, recording, observing. A whisper shifted behind me. "Do you see?" I turned sharply, flashlight trembling. The attic was empty, yet I could feel a presence in every shadow, every beam. I crouched to examine the trunk further. Inside, a journal lay open, pages brittle, handwriting frantic and jagged. Accounts of nights spent hearing whispers, children disappearing into corners of the house itself shifting, stretching when no one watched. Each entry ended with the same line: "They watch, they remember, and they wait." I could feel it. The attic pulsed with memory. Shadows curled like smoke, pressing in, patient and silent. Whispers layered over one another, voices from decades past blending into a single, continuous hum. I realized I had become part of the pattern now, another presence folded into the house's ongoing story. My breath came shallow, shallow enough to hear it over the chorus of murmurs. I moved toward the stairs. My mind raced, questioning what was real and what was imagined. Each step echoed differently now, not just my own, but the rhythm of invisible feet packing in tandem. I glanced back. Shadows swirled, shifting just beyond my peripheral vision. I wasn't alone. I would never be alone, not truly. The house had claimed me, marked me with knowledge, with awareness, with fear. Descending into the hallway, I pressed my hand against the wall, cool, solid, yet vibrating faintly under my palm. The whispers followed me, a river of voices curling around corners, pooling in empty rooms. I felt dizzy, unsteady. The hallway seemed longer, stretching beyond reason, doors tilting at impossible angles. I tried to anchor myself in rationality. The house couldn't move, couldn't speak. And yet it did, slowly, deliberately, terrifyingly. I stopped in the nursery. Dust hung like smoke, the crib empty. Footprints lined the floorboards again, child-sized and fleeting, leading toward the closed door of the locked room. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of history pressing in. The whispers weren't just sounds, they were knowledge, memory, warning. I read the markings on the walls again. "Don't wake them, they remember you. Do not leave." The words vibrated in the air, living, resonant. I left the room slowly, each step measured, trying not to provoke the unseen occupants. The whispers followed, trailing me down the hall. I felt them in the nape of my neck, in the small hairs along my arms, in the tight coil of fear in my stomach. They weren't malevolent, not entirely. They were expectant, patient, insistent, watching me, gauging my reaction, waiting to see if I understood. By the time I reached the front door, the whispers had settled into a faint chorus, echoing behind me like a memory of sound. I stepped outside. The street was empty, fog curling around the lamp posts, the night thick and cold. The air felt lighter, yet I could still feel the pulse of the house, slow and steady, resonating in my chest. The whispers had followed me this far, but not beyond. Not yet. Driving away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had folded me into its memory. The whispers lingered, faint and insistent, in the edges of my mind. I replayed every footstep, every shadow, every word written on the walls. The house had not revealed all its secrets. It had only reminded me that I was part of something ongoing, something patient, waiting for its next listener. That night in my motel room, I lay awake listening to silence, yet hearing the softest echoes of footsteps, faint murmurs curling in the dark corners of my mind. I realized the house had changed me. The whispers weren't gone. They had traveled with me. They would return. And so would I. I knew I had to return. The thought lingered as sleep threatened, soft but insistent. The house listens, the house waits, and I have learned to hear it. The floorboards beneath me groaned differently tonight. Not the usual old house protest, not the ordinary complaint of age, but a softer, deliberate creak, as though the house itself was guiding me somewhere I hadn't yet noticed. My flashlight barely pierced the thick darkness, the beam trembling in my hand, and I felt my pulse tightening, a coil in my chest ready to spring. The hallway stretched long and silent, shadows pooling along the walls like waiting shapes, and I knew I had to follow that subtle pull, even as a cold part of me screamed to turn back. I pressed against the far wall, fingertips brushing along the peeling wallpaper, dust and grime rubbing faintly against my skin. Then I noticed it, a narrow seam, almost invisible at the base of the far hallway wall. The line ran perfectly straight, ending at the corner where darkness pooled. A hidden door, I realized, almost a whisper in the architecture itself. My breath caught. I had explored every inch of this house, yet something so deliberate had waited for me to notice. The house wasn't finished with me, not yet. I knelt, running a hand along the seam. The wood felt slightly warmer than the surrounding panels, almost alive beneath my fingers. My flashlight flickered for a heartbeat. I froze, heart hammering, convinced that some unseen presence had reached out to test me. Then slowly, I traced the edges until I found the small, tarnished knob. It turned under my fingertips, stiff with age but obedient. The panel gave way with a faint sigh, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that escaped was thick, damp, smelling of earth and rot. It carried a weight, a memory pressed into it, old and sharp. I swallowed hard. I should turn back, leave the house, and never return. But something deeper, older, more curious than fear, pulled me down those steps. One careful foot after another, I descended, the walls closing around me like the ribs of some buried creature. At the bottom, the air was colder, denser. A faint scent of decay lingered, sharp and metallic. My flashlight revealed a stone floor, uneven and slick with age. Crates and broken furniture were stacked haphazardly, thick layers of dust hiding their details. Something moved in the shadows at the edge of the beam, just a flicker, and I froze. My fingers wrapped tightly around the flashlight, knuckles white. I whispered to myself, trying to anchor my racing thoughts. It's just shadows, nothing else. Yet the shadows responded. A faint, soft rustle, deliberate, like fabric brushing against stone. Whispers curled at the edges of my hearing, indecipherable murmurs weaving through the silence. I moved cautiously, every step echoing, carrying my presence through the cellar. My flashlight caught a stack of crates, one slightly ajar. Inside, old clothing, dolls with cracked faces, journals with brittle pages, and what looked like remnants of meals long forgotten. These weren't just abandoned items, they were memories left behind. Lives once lived, interrupted, vanished. I knelt to examine one of the journals. The handwriting was frantic, sharp, slanted, narrating nights filled with whispers, doors that opened and closed on their own, footsteps packing unseen. One page caught my eye. They watch. They wait in the darkness where light cannot reach. Those who see them do not leave unchanged. I shivered. The house had been speaking long before I arrived, and now it had pulled me into the center of its story. A faint movement in the corner drew my attention. A crate shifted as if nudged by an invisible hand. My breath caught. I stepped closer, heart hammering, flashlight trembling. Inside, a collection of photographs, yellowed with age, faces blurred and eyes scratched out. One photograph was different. Someone had carefully circled a single figure, small, hunched, watching, with eyes unnervingly clear. I couldn't tear my gaze away. My stomach knotted. The figure in the photo was not alive, not fully. It existed somewhere between memory and shadow, and somehow it had waited for me to see it. The whispers shifted, almost laughter, curling around me, warm and cold at once. I felt their intent, patient and persistent. They weren't trying to scare me, not exactly. They were watching my reactions, testing, seeing if I understood, if I was aware of the house's layered presence. I moved carefully, flashlight sweeping, heart pounding in rhythm with the creaking stones. A doorway at the far end of the cellar beckoned, darker than the rest. The air there was heavier, thick with a sense of history, of loss, of things left incomplete. I approached, stepping lightly over debris. The doorway led to a small chamber, walls slick with damp, faint stains tracing patterns across the stones. In the center, a low table held objects arranged deliberately. A child's shoe, a tarnished locket, scraps of paper with jagged handwriting. Each item hummed with memory, the weight of past lives pressing against me. I felt exposed, a voyeur in a sacred and terrible archive. The whispers coalesced into something almost coherent. Do you see? Do you remember? I knelt beside the table, hands hovering over the artifacts. I wanted to leave, to run, but I couldn't. My curiosity was a tether, pulling me into the house's memory, into the stories trapped in the cellar. I picked up the locket. Inside, a tiny portrait, faded, eyes starring, almost alive in their gaze. My fingertips trembled. The whispers pressed closer, brushing my ears, curling around my mind. Each artifact was a story left unfinished, waiting for a witness. And I was now part of the witness, part of the narrative. A sudden chill made me shiver. Something shifted behind me. Not a sound, not a shadow, a presence. I felt it, patient and slow, breathing with the air, moving with intent. I dared not turn. My body wanted to flee, but my mind couldn't tear itself away. The whispers pressed in again, soft, insistent, words brushing the edges of comprehension. Do you understand? I did not fully. And that was the terror. The cellar, the house itself, existed in layers I could perceive only partially, shadows upon shadows, whispers within whispers. Every artifact I touched, every scrap of memory I uncovered, threaded me further into the house's ongoing story. I felt its patience, its awareness. It had watched, waited, recorded, and now it knew I was aware of its observation. I moved toward a narrow alcove at the side of the chamber. Inside, dust-covered shelving held journals, more photographs, letters folded and brittle. I opened one, scanning the pages. Names, dates, frantic notes about vanished children, families who fled without explanation, nights filled with laughter that wasn't human, shadows that moved when no one looked. The pages ended with a single line, repeated in nearly every entry. They see, they wait, they remember you. The realization settled like ice in my stomach. I wasn't alone, not truly. The house, the cellar, the whispers, they weren't passive, they were patient, observant, deliberate, waiting for someone like me to arrive, to notice, to see. And now I had. I pressed my hands to the stones, feeling the cold seep into my bones, and a wave of vertigo struck. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The cellar seemed to pulse around me, alive, aware, intent. I tried to back away, to ascend the steps I had descended, but the shadows in the corners thickened, curling, shifting. The whispers became layered, multiple voices overlapping, speaking in tones both soft and urgent, brushing against memory, teasing recognition. Do you see? Do you remember? Don't leave. Each phrase pressed against me, heavy and intimate, like hands on my shoulders. My flashlight flickered. Panic rose. I spun, beam catching only dust and scattered objects, yet the sense of being watched intensified. I could feel eyes where no eyes existed, awareness in the air itself. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to step back toward the staircase. The cellar had given me glimpses, partial truths, but not closure. Not yet. Its story remained unfinished. The ascent was slow. My fingers brushed the wall, slick with moisture and memory. Each step felt heavier, weighted by the cellar's persistent gaze. I dared not glance back. The whispers softened, yet persisted, curling in my mind like smoke. "We will remember. You will return." I emerged from the hidden door into the main hallway. The house was quiet now, still, but I felt its pulse in the floorboards, in the walls, in my chest. I had glimpsed the cellar's secrets, but the full story remained veiled, patient, deliberate. I had seen remnants, artifacts, echoes, but I had not answered all the questions. The house had revealed enough to unsettle, to invite, to insist upon my return. Outside, the night pressed against the windows. Fog curled along the street, heavy and slow. The house loomed behind me, patient, silent, watching. I knew I had to leave, to return to the ordinary world, but a part of me remained tethered, pulled into its history. I could feel it in my bones, a lingering weight, a memory pressed into my chest. The whispers were gone, but not truly. They had imprinted themselves, a faint hum at the edges of my mind. Driving away, I realized I was marked, entwined with the house's memory. Its patience was infinite, its awareness deliberate. The cellar, the hidden objects, the artifacts, the whispers, they were all parts of a story ongoing, waiting for the next witness, the next observer. And I had become one. That night in my motel room, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the building echoed like the cellar steps. Every shadow in the corner of the room pulsed faintly, a reminder that I had glimpsed something I could never fully understand. The cellar, the house, the whispers, they would not release me entirely. I was now a part of the story, and it was patient. I closed my eyes, shivering despite the warmth of the bed. A single thought lingered, soft but insistent. I had seen the cellar, glimpsed the house's memory, yet the full truth remained hidden. And I would return, whether I wanted to or not. The sky was bruised with the last remnants of sunset as I drove down the narrow road that led to the orphanage. The trees arched over the asphalt, casting long, crooked shadows that twisted like fingers across the cracked pavement. My headlights caught the occasional glint of broken glass, but mostly. The path ahead was swallowed by shadows. I knew this place had been abandoned for decades, left to crumble in silence, yet a part of me expected to feel it alive somehow, as if the walls themselves remembered the laughter and cries of children long gone. The building emerged slowly, almost reluctantly, at the end of the drive. Its silhouette was jagged against the fading light, rooflines slanted and uneven, windows dark and unwelcoming. I parked the car and stepped out, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying wood. Each footstep on the gravel seemed too loud, reverberating against the stillness. The orphanage was massive, looming, and I felt my stomach tighten as I walked toward it. Something in me resisted, a quiet warning I couldn't name. But curiosity, that insistent tug, outweighed the hesitation. The front doors were splintered and warped. I pushed against one and it groaned, a low, reluctant sound that echoed through the empty halls. Dust motes swirled in the flashlight beam, floating like tiny specters in the dying light. The silence inside was complete, oppressive. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and tense, bouncing back at me from the walls. There were no signs of life, yet I felt watched. Not by anything tangible, but by the lingering weight of memory, the sense that the building itself had eyes and ears and had been waiting. I took cautious steps across the tiled floor. The tiles were cracked, some missing entirely, exposing the rough wooden subfloor beneath. My flashlight swept over peeling wallpaper, faded murals of children playing that seemed too bright and cheerful for the gloom around them. The paint had bubbled and flaked in places, revealing layers of past colors like the bones of some forgotten history. Each mural carried its own silence, the frozen laughter of painted children staring back at me. I swallowed hard, feeling an odd combination of unease and fascination. At the end of the main hallway, a staircase led upward. The banister was splintered, dust-coated, and brittle. I hesitated. Upstairs would likely reveal more, deeper into the orphanage's hidden stories. I wanted to ascend, yet the weight of the building seemed to press down on me, warning me in a language older than words. A faint smell of mold and something else, something iron-like, drifted from above, curling around me. I drew in a breath, steadying my nerves, and stepped onto the first stair. The wood groaned, a warning or perhaps a greeting, I couldn't tell. Each step echoed, a slow metronome marking my progress. My flashlight beam caught doorways, some hanging open, others sealed with warped wood or rusted nails. Behind them, shadows pooled thick and dark, corners swallowing the light, making it impossible to see what lay beyond. I imagined small rooms once filled with beds, toys, the whispered sounds of children preparing for bed. Now those spaces were hollow, abandoned. And yet, there was a hum of something unseen, a subtle vibration in the floor that made my hair rise. I reached the top of the stairs and paused. The hallway stretched long, lined with dozens of doors. Faded numbers clung to the wood, barely legible. 12, 14, 15, some painted over, some peeling away entirely. I ran my fingers along the nearest door. Cold, solid. Yet I could feel history pressed into it, stories embedded in the grain of the wood. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. Silence. But the silence was thick, not empty. I stepped back, shivering, and tried to focus on the notebook in my hand. I had come to document, to record, yet the words seemed inadequate against the weight of the place. A faint sound made me freeze, a scraping almost imperceptible like nails across wood. I spun, flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. Nothing. The hallway was empty, yet my body thrummed with tension, every nerve alert. My rational mind searched for answers. The wind through broken windows, animals seeking shelter, the floor settling. But the sound had a cadence, a subtle insistence, as if it wanted to be heard. I swallowed, gripping my notebook tighter, and pressed on, each step deliberate, careful. I passed room after room, peering inside where my flashlight could reach. Beds, now just metal frames and rotting wood. Toys decayed into unrecognizable shapes. Some remnants looked recent, out of place, like someone had been here not long ago. A chair tilted against the wall, a faded shoe lying near it. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't explain why it mattered, why the small details sent shivers through me, but I knew they were important. They were clues to lives interrupted, fragments left behind by children I would never meet. The hallway ended at a small office. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Dust swirled, motes dancing in the beam of the flashlight. Papers were scattered across the desk, brittle and yellowed. One ledger lay open, listing names, dates, ages. I leaned in, scanning the pages. Some names were crossed out, some annotated with faint, indecipherable notes. A chill ran through me. The ledger felt personal, intimate, a window into the bureaucracy of care that had once tried to contain so many lives. Yet it also felt final, unyielding, a record of absence. I noticed a photograph pinned to the wall above the desk. Children lined up for a group portrait, smiles frozen, eyes bright with life. But something about it made my stomach tight. A few faces were scratched out, slashed with deliberate care. I traced the marks with my finger, feeling the uneven gouges beneath the paper. Who had done this, and why? The questions pressed at me, unanswered. I could feel the house around me, patient, waiting for my attention, for my understanding. Sun was gone now, and darkness filled the orphanage entirely. My flashlight was the only thing keeping shadows at bay, yet the shadows felt restless, shifting as I moved. I realized I wasn't just exploring an abandoned building. I was entering a memory, a history that refused to let go. The air felt heavier here, weighted with the past, thick with the echoes of lives that had passed through these halls. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my nerves, but the silence pressed against me again, thick and expectant. I moved toward the large common room at the end of the hallway. Broken furniture lay scattered, the floor covered in dust. Sunlight, or what little remained, spilled through shattered windows, painting slivers of light across the debris. I stepped over a toppled bench and froze. Footprints. Small, bare footprints pressed faintly into the dust. I crouched, tracing them with my flashlight. They were fresh. Not from me, not from any adult, but small, deliberate steps leading deeper into the shadows. My heart thudded. I wasn't alone. I had not imagined the house's attention. I backed out slowly, keeping my eyes on the footprints, flashlight quivering. The hallway seemed longer now, stretching beyond memory, each door a potential hiding place. The air carried a faint sound, soft laughter, the edges of a song, something half remembered. I could almost see the children, tiny figures just beyond the beam of light, watching, waiting. I swallowed, heart pounding, feeling the weight of the orphanage pressing down. I had come seeking stories, histories, echoes. I had found them, or they had found me. I turned back toward the main stairwell, intent on leaving, yet something held me. Curiosity, the same tug that had drawn me here, whispered in my ear, "There is more. There is a story in the corners, in the dust, in the shadows that shift when you aren't looking." I couldn't leave yet, not fully. I had glimpsed the edges of the orphanage's memory, and it had glimpsed me. The air was alive with expectation, patient and deliberate. The night was still young, and the house had not finished its story with me. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, brushing against the broken windows, carrying the scent of wet earth and something older, darker. I glanced back, flashlight in hand, and felt the weight of the orphanage in my chest, a pulse beneath the floorboards, in the walls, in the shadows themselves. It waited. I had arrived at dusk, and dusk had welcomed me, patient, silent, insistent. I stepped forward, deeper into its embrace, knowing the night ahead would show me more than I could yet imagine. The moment I stepped further into the orphanage, I felt the air thicken, almost viscous, as if the dust itself carried memory. My flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating shapes that were both familiar and uncanny. A small chair lay on its side, its paint chipped and curling like dead skin. A wooden train, broken in half, rested on the floorboards. Each object seemed innocent at first, relics of childhood, yet they hummed with a presence I couldn't explain. I moved slowly, heels scraping the floor, and the sound seemed intrusive, foreign in a place so used to silence. The toys, scattered as if in a hurry, drew my attention. A faded teddy bear leaned against a wall, one glassy eye missing. I crouched to examine it. Dust puffed around the seams, and a faint imprint of tiny fingers lingered in the grime. I shivered, half from the cold, half from the thought that a child had once clutched this bear desperately, perhaps during the very moment something terrible happened. The hallway stretched ahead, long and narrow, lined with doorways like eyes watching. I paused at the threshold of the common room. Broken tables and chairs littered the floor, overturned like the aftermath of chaos. On a low shelf, I noticed a stack of coloring books, the pages yellowed but still faintly illustrated. I lifted one carefully. Scribbles of laughter and imagination, childish and innocent, filled the pages. And yet, the corners of the room seemed darker, somehow absorbing the light from my flashlight. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. Movement, just a flicker at the edge of my vision. I spun my light toward it. Nothing. Only shadows stretching, pulling the corners of the room with them. My heart thumped faster than necessary. I told myself it was the building settling, the wind through broken windows, my mind playing tricks in the dark. But the sensation persisted, a whisper of motion, too fluid to be mechanical, too deliberate to be random. Something was there just beyond the light. I took a cautious step forward, and the floorboards creaked beneath me. I saw them then, tiny shadows darting across the walls, just a fraction too fast for my brain to catch clearly. Faded shapes of children, as if the walls themselves remembered their presence. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, the room was still. My pulse slowed slightly, but the doubt remained. I wasn't imagining it. Or perhaps I was, and the building was simply bending perception to mock me. The toys seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. A small wooden car, previously upright, now lay on its side, as if pushed. A chair that had been leaned against the wall now stood upright, facing me. My rational mind tried to catalog the anomalies, to explain them scientifically, but each explanation felt fragile against the weight of what I was seeing. I could feel the house breathing around me, exhaling stories into the shadows. I continued through the common room toward the back, where a cluster of cribs once held infants long ago. The slats were cracked, some missing entirely, and the faint smell of mildew mixed with something metallic lingered in the air. I knelt, shining my light through one of the empty cribs. A faint imprint remained in the dust, a tiny handprint pressed firmly into the surface. I held my breath. This place hadn't just been abandoned, it had been frozen, waiting for someone to notice. Waiting for me. The feeling of being watched intensified as I moved deeper into the orphanage. My flashlight beam caught movement again, fleeting glimpses in the corner of my eye. Tiny figures gone when I looked directly. My mind resisted the notion that the place was haunted, yet every instinct screamed otherwise. I kept my focus on the objects. The small shoes lined up along a wall, a doll missing its head, a music box, silent and still. But the presence behind my vision was insistent. I reached a hallway that led to the sleeping quarters. The doors were cracked, some barely hanging on their hinges. I opened the first cautiously. The room was bare except for a single bed frame and a faded blanket. Dust coated everything, but I noticed small footprints in the layer, not uniform, some tiny, some larger, like the trail of children who had once roamed freely. The footprints stopped abruptly near the wall. My breath caught. The sudden end felt deliberate, like a warning or an unfinished story. I backed out slowly, and the faint sound of laughter, or was it just the echo of my own imagination, drifted down the hallway. I spun around, shining the flashlight, catching the edges of shadows moving just beyond the reach of light. The shapes were small, childlike, yet the motion was too precise, too purposeful to be coincidence. I felt their eyes on me, unseen yet tangible, and for the first time the sense of being intruded upon turned into fear. I pressed on to the next room. This one had remnants of furniture stacked along the walls, the floor scuffed and stained. On a shelf I noticed small dolls, each with missing limbs or chipped faces. I picked one up carefully. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow me, and for a fleeting second I swore the mouth moved slightly, forming a whisper I couldn't hear. My stomach churned and I set it down, stepping back. Rational thought told me it was dust, the tilt of perspective, the brain's need to make sense. But my gut told me otherwise. I wasn't alone. A sudden creak drew my attention to the end of the hallway. A door I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a partition of broken furniture. I approached it slowly. The door was locked, heavy and coated with rust. I ran my fingers along the handle, cold, solid. Yet it radiated history, a presence pressed into the wood. I could almost hear a whisper from the other side, faint, like the memory of a child's voice, asking questions I didn't want to answer. I stepped back, heart hammering, and realized that the house had layers, hidden spaces, stories trapped behind walls. I continued along the hallway, flashlight sweeping the corners. The shadows flickered in sync with my movements, always at the periphery. Toys shifted, chairs tilted slightly as though nudged by unseen hands. I paused by a broken table and traced a line in the dust, watching the fine powder fall through my fingers. The motion caught a shadow near the ceiling, moving with intent. I froze. Was it imagination, or was it watching, waiting for me to act? My pulse thrummed in my ears. At the end of the hall, a large mural faded with age covered the wall. Children playing in a garden, their smiles painted in muted colors, but there was an emptiness in their eyes now. I stepped closer. The light caught something strange. The figures' shadows didn't match their forms. They shifted, lingered longer than the brushstrokes allowed. I shivered. The room seemed to ripple, subtle vibrations in the floorboards, as if the house itself was breathing around me. The shadows were alive, but alive in a different sense, memory and presence entwined. I backed away slowly, keeping my focus on the mural as I moved. A soft sound, like whispered words, drifted from the ceiling beams. I tilted my head, straining to hear. The language was indistinct, syllables forming and dissolving like smoke. I couldn't tell if it was a warning, a story, or simply the echo of my imagination. The fear coiled tight inside me, but beneath it, curiosity persisted. The house wanted to tell me something, and I could feel the pull, irresistible and patient. I reached a small corner where the toys were most concentrated. Blocks, wooden animals, books, all decayed, yet arranged in a strange order as though someone had left them deliberately. I bent to examine a small book. Scribbles, drawings, childish letters, all faded into illegibility. But in the margins, something else. Tiny scratches that didn't match the handwriting style of the rest of the page. A warning, a message. I couldn't read it, yet I felt it pressing against my consciousness. Something had been here recently, or at least, the memory of someone or something lingered. By now, the shadows were insistent, not overt but always present. Tiny movements, peripheral shapes, sounds that didn't align with the decay of the building. My heart raced, yet I couldn't tear myself away. The orphanage had begun to speak in whispers and half-glimpsed gestures, telling me stories of children who once ran these halls, who left imprints that refused to fade. I felt their presence in every room, in every object, in every shadow that moved just beyond comprehension. I paused in the middle of the hall, flashlight steadying, notebook clutched. The children's shadows flickered again, just at the edges of vision. A small handprint in the dust at my feet confirmed what my instincts had been screaming. I wasn't alone. The house had waited for me, and now it was awake. The whispers, the movements, the tiny hints of life in a place long dead, they were all here for me to notice, to record, to carry forward. And yet, as much as I observed, the house held back its full story, leaving gaps, hints, unanswered questions. I exhaled slowly, chest tight with both fear and fascination. The shadows would not be ignored. They beckoned, teasing, whispering, reminding me that some presences never leave. Even in absence, they linger. The orphanage was more than abandoned. It was alive in memory, in echoes, in the small, subtle movements that my eyes caught only when I looked away. And I knew, deep down, that what I had begun to see was only the surface. The house had more secrets, darker stories waiting, and I was not finished with them yet. I found it tucked behind a stack of dusty ledgers on a splintered shelf in the main office, the kind of shelf that had sagged under the weight of years. The leather cover was cracked, brittle at the edges, the spine barely holding the pages together. Something about it made the air thrum in my ears, like a warning I couldn't quite place. I reached for it, fingertips brushing the surface, and a small puff of dust swirled in the beam of my flashlight. The smell of mildew and old paper mixed with something sharper, metallic, almost like iron. I hesitated. What secrets did this book hold? The diary was thick, the handwriting cramped and meticulous, the ink fatting but still legible. Each page carried the rhythm of someone who had lived in the walls, breathed in the same stale air, watched over children who no longer existed. I turned the first page slowly. Names, dates, small notes about daily routines, meals, chores, bedtime stories. Ordinary entries, almost comforting in their mundanity. Yet there were gaps. Days unaccounted for, pages skipped, as though the writer had stopped in the middle of thought and left the story dangling. I read on, voice low in my own head, imagining the caretaker speaking these words aloud. At first it was routine, almost tedious, which children were mischievous, who was sick, who had scraped a knee. But then the tone shifted subtly, a dark undercurrent threading the sentences. Mentions of missing children appeared, brief and almost casual. A note about Tommy, last seen near the East Wing, erased later, found wandering, and yet no further detail. The casualness unnerved me. How could someone write about missing children in such a detached way? The next entry made my breath hitch. The shadows linger longer each night. I hear them whispering in the halls, even when the building is empty. I think the children are trying to tell me something, but I cannot understand. The handwriting trembled here, a small blot of ink smearing across the page. I could feel the caretaker's fear, not just recorded but pressed into the fibers of the paper. The thought of someone alone, surrounded by these walls, haunted by what they could not explain, made the hair on my arms rise. I flipped further, discovering an entry that stopped abruptly mid-sentence. I cannot leave them alone in them. And then a line scratched out violently, ink smeared as if the pen had been wrenched from the writer's hand. My pulse raced. What had happened? What had the caretaker seen? The diary was a breadcrumb trail of unease, revealing small, ordinary horrors that built slowly into something more sinister. I noticed a small sketch tucked between pages, almost hidden, a crude drawing of the orphanage top down with little stick figures in rooms. Some figures were crossed out. One corner of the sketch had a dark smudge, almost like a stain from tears or something older, something that had seeped into the paper over decades. I traced it with my finger, a chill running through me. The children's rooms were marked carefully, yet some spaces were left blank, unaccounted for. The implication pressed in on me like the walls themselves. The further I read, the more I realized the caretaker had been documenting not just daily life, but something inexplicable. Small notes of sounds in the night, footsteps, laughter, the faint clinking of toys. At first they seemed like hallucinations, symptoms of stress, but the precision of the entries, the consistency, suggested otherwise. Someone or something had been moving through these halls when no one was there. The diary was a record of presence, unseen yet undeniable. I paused, listening. The orphanage was silent, or at least it seemed so. Yet I could almost hear echoes of what the diary described. A floorboard creaking far down the hall, a faint giggle that dissolved into the air before it fully formed. My flashlight trembled slightly in my hand as I turned the page. Another entry. I spoke to Michael today. He says he sees figures at the window at night. I tried to reassure him, but the fear in his eyes is not his own. It is old, carried from the walls. The words scratched into my chest, heavier than the paper itself. One paragraph caught me completely off guard. It described a game, one the children invented on rainy days, hide and seek in the wings that had been boarded up. The caretaker noted that the children returned each time with wide, pale eyes, silent as if they had seen something that could not be named. The line ended with a warning scribbled in margins. Do not enter the East Wing alone. They do not want to be found. I froze. The East Wing, the part of the orphanage I had glimpsed through the cracked doors, had been dark, almost impenetrable. My curiosity warred with fear, the diary pulling me toward a place I might not want to go. There were pages filled with mundane observations. The weather, what meals had been served, small accidents, scraped knees, minor illnesses. And yet threaded through these banalities were almost imperceptible signs of obsession, of terror. A repetition of words, phrases, warnings in the margins circled in a frenzy. They return at night. The silence is louder than any cry. Do not stay after dark. The caretaker's mind was a map of dread. Each entry a landmark on a path I didn't want to walk, yet couldn't stop following. I turned another page. A small note had been tucked in, a folded scrap of paper. On it scrawled in jagged handwriting, "They remember everything. They know when you are alone." My breath caught. My hand shook. Was this the caretaker or someone else? Something older, something still lingering, leaving messages for those who came after. The orphanage itself seemed alive with memory, and the diary was proof that the walls did not forget. The final pages were the hardest to read. They were torn, edges frayed, ink faded almost to nothing. But I could make out fragments. I can no longer sleep. The children watch, even in my dreams. I hear whispers that I do not understand. I cannot, and then nothing. The words ended abruptly, and the page was blank. I closed the diary slowly, holding it against my chest. The room was silent, yet the air was heavy, pregnant with a presence I could not name. I set the diary down carefully on a low table. The objects around me, broken toys, abandoned furniture, scattered shoes, suddenly seemed more animated, more deliberate. The shadows seemed to lean closer, as if aware I had learned their story. I felt the weight of unseen eyes, the echo of tiny voices carried in the walls, brushing past me. The diary had been a bridge, a whisper from the past, yet it did not explain everything. It revealed hints, teased at horrors, and then left me alone with the questions. Questions I couldn't ignore. How many children had vanished? What had the caretaker truly seen in the East Wing? Why did the orphanage itself seem to remember and respond, long after the last living soul had gone? The diary offered fragments, pieces of a puzzle I could feel but not yet solve. And the faintest trace of movement in my peripheral vision suggested the puzzle was not static. The presence in the house had noticed me noticing. I placed the diary back carefully, dust rising in small clouds around it. The shadows shifted again, subtle, fluid, impossible to grasp. A soft sound, almost a whisper, brushed my ear. I spun, flashlight cutting across the corners, catching nothing but the outlines of broken furniture. And yet I knew it had been there, deliberate and fleeting. The diary had awakened something, or at least made me aware of what had been watching all along. I moved toward the stairs, my steps careful, every creak a warning. The diary rested on the table behind me, its pages alive with the caretaker's fear and the children's echoes. I felt the building's eyes on me, curious, patient, waiting to see what I would do next. I could not leave, not yet. Not when the story had revealed itself only in glimpses, and the East Wing remained unexplored. The unanswered questions pressed on me. What had happened to the missing children? What secrets were hidden in the boarded rooms? And why did the diary end so abruptly, leaving a void where fear and memory mingled? I paused at the top of the stairs, looking back over my shoulder at the office. The diary sat there, unassuming, yet impossibly heavy, as though it carried the weight of decades. The shadows seemed to stretch toward it, reluctant to release it but unwilling to move too quickly. And in that stillness, I understood that this orphanage did not simply hold objects or memories. It held fragments of consciousness, remnants of life that had never fully left. As I descended, I kept my eyes on the walls, the floor, the shifting corners of the rooms. Every shadow, every flicker of light felt charged with meaning. The diary had shown me that the children's presence was not just metaphorical. They lingered, watching, whispering, moving in ways I could sense but not fully perceive. And somewhere, deeper in the east wing, something waited, something patient, something that had been watching the caretaker just as it now watched me. The diary had answered a few questions, but it had left a greater number unspoken. It had given me insight into fear, loss, and the enduring echo of life in a place meant to be empty. And as I moved further into the orphanage, I carried the weight of its story with me, knowing that the house itself was not done speaking, and that the shadows, the whispers, and the memory of the children would continue to follow. The diary had been heavy in my hands, but the orphanage itself was heavier. Each step I took toward the east wing felt like pressing through water, thick and resistant, as though the air remembered all the children who had once run through these halls. The floorboards groaned beneath me, and somewhere in the distance, a door shifted on its hinges, whispering secrets I could almost understand but could not quite grasp. I pushed open the old service door, one I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a stack of dusty cots. The hinges protested, groaning like they were warning me off, but I slipped through anyway. The corridor stretched before me, narrower than the main halls, lined with faded wallpaper peeling in curling strips. The faint smell of rot and dampness hit my nose, but beneath it, something sharper lingered, metallic and sweet. I paused, flashlight cutting across the walls. Long shadows stretched, almost reaching for me, though I knew it was only my imagination. Or maybe it was. The corridor led to a small room I didn't recognize, filled with chairs stacked like broken teeth against the walls. Faded drawings covered the lower half of the wallpaper, tiny stick figures holding hands, circles around faces. A single figure crossed out in black crayon. My stomach tightened. The diary's warnings pulsed in my memory. Do not enter the east wing alone. Now I understood. This was the east wing, the heart of the unease. I stepped inside, careful not to disturb anything, but the air shifted, colder than the rest of the building. My flashlight flickered. A low creak echoed from the far corner. I froze. Nothing should be moving. And yet I could almost see the faintest trace of movement at the corner of my eye, a shadow twisting just beyond the light. I spun my head, but the room was empty. I told myself it was fatigue, nerves, imagination. But my chest felt tight, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. The corridor continued past the room, narrowing into something more like a passageway than a hallway. The walls were lined with doors, many locked, others warped and splintered. I tried a few handles, cold metal, unyielding. One door, slightly ajar, revealed only darkness, yet I could sense a presence. The air there was thicker, and my flashlight beam seemed to hesitate, as if afraid to penetrate it. The diary's words echoed again. They do not want to be found. A soft sound reached my ears, almost imperceptible at first. Footsteps. Light, hesitant, packing somewhere just out of reach. I froze, trying to convince myself it was the house settling. But the rhythm was deliberate, too precise to be random. My heartbeat picked up. Each step echoed, bouncing along the walls in a pattern, almost like someone was walking just behind me or maybe in front, mirroring me. My mind raced. Could it be the children, or had the caretaker been right all along? Something lingered here, unseen, patient. I moved forward, hand brushing against the peeling wallpaper. Faded drawings marked rooms I couldn't enter. A scribbled note, long yellowed, was pinned to one door with a rusted nail. Do not look inside. The warning made me hesitate, but my curiosity outweighed my fear. The corridor bent, and suddenly I was in a larger room, long abandoned, the remnants of beds lined against the walls. Dust coated everything, and the faint outline of small footprints led from one side of the room to the other. They were too small to be mine, too precise to be random. The footprints stopped at a door at the far end of the room. It was locked, but not with a modern lock. This was an old latch, warped and stubborn as if it had been resisting for decades. I tried to force it open, and it gave with a heavy groan. Inside, darkness pressed back, suffocating and absolute. I held my flashlight low, scanning. The beam fell on a wall covered in writing, faded, scratched into the paint, nearly illegible. Words ran in chaotic spirals, some just fragments. "No one leaves. They are watching. Do not open your eyes." My pulse spiked. The caretaker's fear had been etched here too, decades ago. A faint whisper reached me, unintelligible, curling around the edges of my consciousness. I spun, flashlight catching only the outlines of the room. The footprints were gone. I could feel eyes on me, not human, patient, waiting. I swallowed hard, trying to anchor myself, but the whispers grew louder, layered, coming from the walls themselves. I thought I recognized the syllables. Names of children, voices overlapping in a single haunting chorus. The weight of it pressed down on me, but I forced a step forward. Another door appeared, slightly ajar, revealing a room filled with broken toys and scattered books. The light hit a small wooden train on the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and for a moment the room felt normal, almost peaceful. My chest eased, the pressure of unseen eyes lifting slightly. Then I noticed the chair in the corner tipped over. Something small had moved it recently. The dust trail was fresh. My breath caught again. Nothing was safe, nothing truly abandoned. I turned to leave, but a faint draft blew through the corridor, carrying a smell of iron and decay. My flashlight flickered violently, and for a second I thought I saw a figure at the far end. A child, small, pale, watching. But when I blinked, nothing remained. Just the empty corridor stretching into darkness. The diary's warnings, the caretaker's frantic scribbles, all pressed against my mind. They remember. They watch. They wait. I pressed forward, leaving the toy room behind, following the corridor to a staircase descending into what felt like the bowels of the orphanage. The steps were uneven, rotted at the edges, each creak echoing like a shout. Shadows pooled in the corners, dark and thick. I told myself it was just the building, but every instinct screamed otherwise. Something had been guiding me here, or testing me. The hidden wing wasn't just a part of the orphanage. It was the heart of its memory, of its presence, and I had entered willingly. The stairs opened into a small hallway, the walls lined with old lockers. I paused, scanning. One locker door was ajar, and inside a coat hung, moth-eaten but oddly shaped, as if someone had worn it recently. A childish laugh echoed softly just behind my ear, and I spun. Empty hallway. My flashlight trembled in my hands. The air was thick, almost solid, and the whispers began again, a susurrus of syllables I almost understood. I tried to make sense of it, tried to anchor myself in logic, but the house had its own rules now. At the end of the hall, another door, smaller this time, wooden and splintered. It led to a storage room filled with crates and old furniture stacked in chaotic piles. Dust motes floated in the flashlight's beam, but there was something else too. A pattern in the dust, like small footprints leading into the shadows between the crates. I crouched, brushing away the dirt. Tiny handprints pressed into the floor, leading deeper into the dark. My stomach twisted. The children had been here, or something like them. And maybe, just maybe, they had never left. A faint scratching reached my ears, rhythmic, almost deliberate. I froze, heart hammering, straining to listen. It came from behind one of the crates. I took a step closer, the sound stopping instantly. My own shadow stretched across the floor, and for a moment I thought I saw multiple shadows, twisting and writhing where none should have been. I blinked. Empty, silent. But the air still hummed with presence, patient, watching. I moved cautiously through the storage room, following the trail of handprints. At the far end, a small hatch in the floor caught my eye. It had been hidden beneath a stack of crates, unnoticed for decades. My flashlight illuminated the edges, a thin wooden door rotted at the corners with scratches along the surface. It was small, barely large enough for one person to descend. My pulse raced. The diary's warnings pressed in. Do not stay after dark. And yet I couldn't turn away. I had to know. I lifted the hatch. Dust exploded into the air, motes shimmering in the flashlight's beam. The stairs below were narrow, descending into blackness. I could feel the temperature drop, the air grow heavier, thicker. A faint sound, like children whispering, drifted upward from below. I swallowed hard. My legs shook as I stepped onto the first stair. The presence pressed around me, patient and deliberate. I was intruding into something older, something that had been waiting for decades. The hidden wing had revealed itself fully now. The corridors, the rooms, the scattered toys, the handprints, they were all parts of a larger story, a memory pressed into the building itself. And at the end of it, beneath the orphanage, something waited, patient, watching, and aware of my presence. I hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, flashlight beam trembling over the darkness. The whispering rose again, a chorus of voices, overlapping, urgent, yet unintelligible. I realized with a sinking certainty. I had entered a place that did not belong entirely to the living, and whatever I found below would not be forgotten. And still I stepped down. The house felt alive, and I was certain it was aware of me. Every step I took echoed like a warning, bouncing off the walls of the long, empty hallways. I tried to convince myself it was just the floorboards, the old wood contracting, creaking with age. But deep down, I knew better. Something was watching, always watching, patient and deliberate. I paused in the main corridor, flashlight scanning the shadows. The beam fell across the faded wallpaper, peeling at the corners. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing just beyond the light, blurred at the edges like smoke in the corner of my vision. I blinked. Nothing. Just the corridor stretching into darkness, lined with doors that led nowhere, or perhaps to rooms that wanted to remain hidden. A soft footstep echoed behind me. My breath hitched. I spun, flashlight cutting across the hall, but no one was there. Another step, faint, deliberate, following me. I told myself it was a rat, a piece of debris shifting under the weight of the house settling. Yet the rhythm matched mine, too deliberate to be accidental. I started walking faster, each footfall answered almost immediately by another, echoing in perfect sync. The east wing had been quieter before, abandoned and still. Now it felt alive with anticipation, every shadow stretching toward me, every corner hiding eyes I could not see. I passed a row of doors, most closed, one slightly ajar. I peered inside, empty, but a faint chill ran down my spine. The air smelled of decay, but beneath it lingered something sharper, coppery. Blood, or just memory pretending to be present. I moved down the hall, flashlight trembling in my grip. Each step made the house respond. A floorboard creaked ahead of me, though I had not yet reached it. My pulse spiked. I spun again. Nothing, but I could feel it, whatever it was, circling, watching from places I could not see. The air itself seemed to pulse, thickening with each breath I took. I passed the old library, the shelves sagging under the weight of forgotten books. A faint whisper drifted from within, unintelligible but human. I froze. The sound stopped. I strained my ears. Silence except for the echo of my own footsteps. Then a soft, deliberate tap came from the far corner. I swung the flashlight. A book lay on the floor, pages fanned open, words blurred by age, but it had fallen from the shelf. I hadn't touched it. Another step, this time to my left. I spun, but the hallway was empty. The air pressed in, cold against my skin, as if something unseen had brushed past me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing heart. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet I pressed forward. Curiosity was stronger than fear, though fear clung to me like a second skin. I reached the dining hall, long and narrow, chairs tipped over as if the children had fled in a panic. I shone the light across the room. Dust lay undisturbed, yet I could feel movement just beyond the beam. A shadow flitted at the edge of my vision, gone the moment I focused on it. My hands shook. I told myself it was exhaustion, nerves fraying under the weight of this place. But deep down, I knew this house was alive in a way I could not comprehend. Footsteps again, behind me, closer this time. I froze, straining to locate the source. Nothing. Just the corridor stretching back, silent, empty. My flashlight flickered. A faint whisper curled around my ear, so soft I almost thought I had imagined it. "Why are you here?" I spun. The hall was empty. My own heartbeat roared in my ears. I moved toward the back of the orphanage, past the old kitchen. Pots and pans hung crookedly, some smashed on the floor. I felt eyes on me. Not just one pair, but many, unseen but knowing. The footsteps followed, echoing in sync with mine, though I had not heard them for a moment. They were patient, deliberate, stalking. The house itself seemed to breathe around me, walls creaking as though the building were alive. I stopped in the center of the hall, flashlight shaking. For a moment, everything was still. Then a soft scuff came from the left, then the right. I could not tell where it was coming from. The presence was everywhere and nowhere at once. My chest tightened. I realized I could no longer tell what was real and what was imagined. The house had blurred the line. I pressed forward toward the stairs leading to the hidden wing. Each step brought a chorus of echoes, footsteps mimicking mine from above, below, and behind. I paused at the top, hand gripping the railing, peering into the shadowed corridor beyond. The beam of my flashlight caught the edges of a small figure darting behind a door. I blinked. Gone. Just the corridor, silent, empty. But I felt its eyes, waiting, patient. The night deepened. The house seemed to shift around me. Walls I had passed an hour ago felt closer, tighter, as if the building itself was bending to observe. The footsteps continued, sometimes quick, sometimes slow, always deliberate. I realized I could no longer ignore them. Whatever was here knew my every move, anticipated my thoughts, and followed me with a patience older than the orphanage itself. I entered the nursery, the room frozen in time. Cribs lined the walls, broken toys scattered across the floor. Dust motes floated in the flashlight beam, shimmering like tiny ghosts. A soft scuff behind me made me jump. I turned. Nothing. But a small chair rocked gently as though someone had just left it. My breath hitched. The air smelled faintly of crayons and old paper, a memory pressed into the present. The footsteps echoed again, now circling the room just out of sight. I moved toward the corner where a pile of old blankets lay. A small toy car rolled across the floor on its own, then stopped abruptly. My mind raced. The diary's words whispered in my memory. They never left. A whisper curled around me again, soft, urgent. Don't leave. I froze, caught between disbelief and certainty. The house was alive, and it had claimed me in its web. A long hallway stretched ahead, walls lined with doors. I passed each one slowly, flashlight trembling, hearing soft footsteps behind me, then ahead, then beside me. I tried to confront it, voice shaking. Who's there? Silence. Then faintly a chorus of whispers, layering names I did not know, voices overlapping in a haunting harmony. My pulse spiked. The orphanage remembered them, and it remembered me. I reached the end of the hall, a door slightly ajar, revealing the hidden wing. The temperature dropped sharply. My flashlight flickered, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. A soft, deliberate step echoed from behind. I spun, empty corridor. My own reflection in a cracked window mocked me. The whispers intensified, swirling, pressing in. I realized the presence wasn't just following. It was guiding, drawing me into the heart of the orphanage. I descended the hidden staircase, each step groaning under my weight. The air thickened, heavy with a metallic tang. Footsteps echoed in the shadows, circling me, anticipating every move. I reached the bottom, flashlight catching the edges of crates and old furniture. Handprints, small, pressed into the dust, led deeper into the darkness. The whispers grew louder, voices overlapping, urgent yet incomprehensible. I paused, realizing I could not turn back. The presence was everywhere now, pressing against me from all sides. Footsteps echoed in perfect sync, circling, patient, aware. A soft laughter drifted from somewhere below, high-pitched, fleeting. I swallowed hard, heart hammering. The orphanage had revealed itself fully. The hidden wing, the scattered toys, the handprints, they were all part of something older, something alive. And in the darkness, I understood the truth. The house did not want me to leave. It had been waiting for decades, patient, observing, collecting memories. The footsteps, the whispers, the soft brushes of unseen fingers, they were not warnings. They were claims. I was no longer just a visitor. I was part of the presence now, caught in its unseen gaze, unable to tell if I was being watched or had become the watcher. I took a cautious step forward, deeper into the hidden wing. The whispers rose to a chorus, layering over one another names, pleas, fragments of memory. Footsteps mirrored mine perfectly. The air pressed against my skin, thick and suffocating. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but curiosity and fear pressed me onward. I had to see. I had to know. And somewhere in the dark, patient and waiting, the orphanage smiled. The night didn't end. I stepped out of the orphanage, the door groaning shut behind me, and I thought relief would wash over me, but it didn't. The sky above was bruised and low. The first hints of dawn refused to pierce the horizon. Shadows clung to the trees, stretched long and strange, almost moving on their own. I should have felt free. I should have felt safe. Instead, a weight pressed down on my chest, and every step I took felt like walking through molasses. I glanced back at the building. Its windows were dark but not empty. I swear I saw something flicker in the far corner of the attic, like a candle had briefly caught fire and then vanished. My heart thumped, but my feet moved forward, refusing to look back again. The street was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made every rustle of leaves sound deliberate. Each sound felt amplified, pointing at me, following me. I tried to rationalize it, wind, animals, but it didn't feel right. Even as I walked faster, I could feel it. The house was still with me. Memories of footsteps echoing in the corridors, whispers curling around my ears, small hands pressing into dust. They weren't gone. They were here, trailing me, inhabiting the air I breathed. And with every step, that feeling grew stronger, heavier, more insistent. I reached the main road, the asphalt cracked and slick with dew. A bird called somewhere far off, but the note was hollow, echoing strangely, like it had bounced off walls that weren't there. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something sweeter, metallic, tangy. My stomach twisted. I wanted to tell myself it was nerves, that it was normal, but I knew it was. Every streetlight I passed flickered, and in the brief shadows between them I could see shapes that weren't mine. Shadows stretching longer, wider, sometimes shifting against the wind. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, a tired mind playing games. But my chest tightened, my legs felt leaden. I knew the orphanage hadn't just let me go. It couldn't. It had left threads, strings tangled in my mind. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking. Hands trembling, flashlight still clutched. I felt as if the house was breathing in sync with me, every exhale pressing into my lungs. The keys jingled, metal against metal, but even the sound didn't comfort me. It echoed oddly, stretched too long, like the air was thicker than it should be. I forced the engine to start. The headlights cut through the mist, weak and trembling, but they didn't erase the feeling that something, someone, followed me. I drove slowly back toward town, trying to convince myself it was over. Every turn of the wheel made shadows dance in the peripheral vision, and I jumped at them. The road curved sharply, and for a moment I could swear I saw a figure standing by the edge of the trees. Just a silhouette, pale and small, watching. I blinked. Gone. My pulse thudded in my ears. At home, the morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. Light spilled weakly through the curtains, pale and hesitant. The orphanage still clung to me. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows, felt like the same presence I'd left behind. I tried to shower, to eat, to do normal things, but nothing was normal. My hands shook when I reached for the cup. My reflection in the mirror seemed sharper, edges too defined, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw a small figure standing behind me, gone when I turned. I tried to sleep. I told myself exhaustion had made me see and hear things, but even under the blankets in my quiet room, I felt it. Movement in the shadows, soft brushing sounds, whispers curling at the edge of hearing. Names, fragments of memory, children calling out just barely out of reach. I forced myself to close my eyes, but the darkness behind my eyelids wasn't empty. The orphanage had settled into my mind, curling around thoughts, rooting itself in my memory. I began writing it down, documenting everything, hoping to release it, to understand it. But the words came out jagged, like the house itself guided my hand. Sentences I didn't remember thinking formed on the page. Whispers sometimes answered me while I wrote, subtle, coaxing. I realized that even in daylight, the orphanage had left a trace, a presence that didn't vanish with night. Days passed, but the unease never left. I walked around town, but the air seemed heavier, shadows deeper, as if I carried the house with me. Occasionally, I thought I heard footsteps echoing behind me, soft and deliberate, matching my pace. I turned. Empty streets. Trees swayed, leaves rustling, but no one was there. Every corner I turned, every darkened alley seemed to pulse with memory, the orphanage whispering, following, patient. Even writing about it felt dangerous. The diary I had found, the hidden wing, the footsteps, they weren't just memories. They had infected my perception. My mind conjured small movements in rooms I had never returned to, corners of streets that seemed to stretch unnaturally, shadows that lingered too long. And I knew I wasn't imagining all of it. Part of the orphanage had come with me, and it refused to leave. One evening, I walked past the park near town. Children played in the fading light, laughing and shouting. But their voices reminded me too much of those I had left behind, echoes of small cries that never found a home. A shadow crossed the path, thin and fleeting, darting just at the edge of my vision. I stopped. My heart thudded. The sun dipped, long shadows stretching, and I realized something terrifying. The orphanage hadn't let me go. It had never intended to. Sleep became fragmented. Dreams were filled with halls I had never seen, rooms that seemed familiar, objects I had never touched. Whispers curled at the edges of my consciousness, voices I could not fully hear, repeating phrases I did not recognize. I woke in the dark, blanket twisted around me, and felt the same heavy presence pressing against my chest that I had felt in the orphanage. Sometimes I saw small shapes moving in the corner of my room. Sometimes I swore someone breathed against my neck. I tried to escape it, to move, to forget. I traveled, staying in hotels, driving through empty roads, but the orphanage followed. The shadows clung, soft creaks in the walls, whispers in the corridors. In every reflection, I thought I saw small figures, children standing silently behind me, waiting. The house was in me, or perhaps I had become part of it. I could not tell anymore. At night, when the world was quiet, the whispers grew stronger. Footsteps echoed in my apartment, always soft, always deliberate. I could feel them moving in the rooms I was in, shifting when I shifted, patient, waiting. Sometimes a toy I had not touched appeared in my doorway. Sometimes I heard small laughter drifting from corners I had never opened. Every morning felt pale, weak, never fully breaking the darkness that lingered. I began keeping notes, recording every movement, every sound, every fleeting shadow. But even as I wrote, I knew the act was futile. The orphanage had taught me that stories never end. They linger, they follow, they root themselves in memory. And I was not immune. The house had seeped into my mind, and though I could step away physically, I could not leave the presence behind. Weeks passed. The sky brightened, sun rising in slow, reluctant arcs. But for me, morning never came. Each day blended into the next, shadows lingering longer, whispers growing sharper. Every reflection, every passing stranger felt like the orphanage reaching out through the world, claiming memory, claiming attention, claiming presence. I realized with horror that it didn't matter where I went. The house, its secrets, its unseen children, had never let me leave. And in the quiet moments, I could feel it waiting for me to return, waiting for me to step back across the threshold, to walk once more down those endless corridors, to hear footsteps echoing behind me and whispers curling around my ears. Morning never came. The orphanage had followed, patient, endless, unseen, and I knew it always would. I sit here now, pen in hand, recording what I can, hoping that writing will protect me or at least distract me, but I know better. The unseen presence is patient, deliberate, waiting for me to forget my fear, to step carelessly, to listen too closely. And when I do, it will be there, watching, waiting, whispering. The orphanage has become part of my mind, my memory, my perception. I walk the world as if through its shadowed halls. Every creak, every shift of air, every whisper carries it with me. I cannot escape it, and I fear that I never will. Morning never came, and perhaps for me, it never will. Even now, as I close this journal, I feel it. Footsteps behind me, soft, careful, patient, waiting, watching. And I know that someday it will guide me back, silently, inexorably, to the place where night never ends. The gates were taller than I expected. rusted iron curling in patterns that once might have been elegant. The hinges groaned as I pushed them, the sound sharp against the wind, slicing through the quiet that swallowed the factory whole. The rumors had said it closed after an accident, something unspeakable, something the townspeople avoided speaking of. But standing here, I felt something heavier than history, something alive in the emptiness, watching, waiting. I stepped onto the cracked concrete yard. Every footfall echoed, hollow and uneven. The air smelled of rust and oil, of machines long dead but somehow remembered. A metal door, half off its frame, swung slightly with the wind, creaking in slow, uneven pulses. I hesitated. It was too quiet but too restless. The silence pressed against me, not peaceful but expectant, like it was breathing, patient. Inside, the factory was a cathedral of shadows. Sunlight filtered through broken windows in shards, falling on shattered equipment. Conveyor belts hung frozen, chains twisted like skeletons. I ran my hand over a machine once enormous, now still, feeling the cold, rough metal. Every surface seemed to hum faintly, as if memories of motion had soaked into the steel, murmuring softly when I touched them. The deeper I went, the more the silence changed. Not just quiet, but listening. My footsteps no longer echoed naturally. They bounced back with hesitation, like the factory was weighing them, delaying them. I paused, breath tightening, and thought I heard a whisper. Just a flicker, a hiss, gone the instant I focused. I told myself it was nothing, the wind, imagination. But the feeling lingered, clawing at the edges of my mind. A staircase led up to the office floors. Rust crunched underfoot. I gripped the railing and climbed slowly. The higher I went, the smaller the windows became, letting in thinner slices of light. Shadows stretched long and strange, pooling in corners, stretching across desks, filing cabinets, chairs tipped over in sudden violence or slow surrender. I could almost imagine the people who had worked here, moving through the halls, unaware of the accident that would stop everything. Almost. In the office, papers lay scattered, brittle with age. Some were blank, some typed, some handwritten in tight, urgent script. I picked one up. The words were mundane, inventory lists, schedules, but the edges of the page curled as if recoiling from touch. My eyes kept flicking toward the corners of the room, where shadows shifted unnaturally. I felt the factory watching, measuring, remembering. Every whisper of movement in the old paper stacks made me flinch. I moved toward the main hall, the space where the machines had once roared. The floor was cracked, tiles lifted, the skeletons of rails and belts pointing like broken fingers. Sunlight caught on a puddle of something dark, reflecting light like a slow heartbeat. I knelt, almost touching it, and hesitated. The air felt heavier here, warmer, almost suffocating. I couldn't tell if it was fear or something else. My hands trembled. I wanted to leave, but something pulled me forward, deeper into the shadows. A door at the far end caught my attention. It was sealed, a heavy slab of steel with numbers scrawled in white paint. I pressed my hand to it, cold, solid, unyielding, and then I felt it, a subtle vibration through the metal, faint like a pulse. My mind raced, machines, wind, or something else, something alive. I stepped back, heart hammering. For a moment I swore I saw a shadow move behind the door, just a flicker, gone, but the pulse remained, soft, insistent, patient. I decided to explore a side corridor. The walls were lined with pipes, rusting, dripping faintly. The corridor narrowed and the air smelled sweeter here, faintly metallic, coppery. My flashlight caught a figure at the end, or maybe I imagined it. Pale, small, standing just beyond the beam. I froze. When I blinked, it was gone. The beam swung, nothing. Just pipes, shadows, decay. My pulse raced. I told myself it was fear, the mind playing tricks. But the cold prickle on my neck disagreed. The factory seemed to breathe with me. Every step, every turn felt observed. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps behind me echoing, but when I spun, no one was there. The silence was never empty. Sometimes it shifted subtly, like the shadows moved on their own. A stack of boxes toppled slowly in the distance, no wind, no hand. I froze, my breath shallow. The emptiness wasn't empty. It waited, watched, remembered. I found a stairwell leading down into a basement I hadn't expected. The door was heavy, the wood swollen with age. The handle rattled as I twisted it. Darkness spilled upward like ink. I swallowed and descended. Each step creaked, protested. The air grew colder, damp, carrying the smell of oil, rust, and something fouler, deeper. The walls here were lined with old lockers, doors hanging open, empty, or hiding shadows that seemed to twitch when I looked away. The basement opened into a vast room. Machinery from another era loomed, massive presses and wheels frozen mid-motion. The floor was cracked, puddles reflecting the faint light. I felt eyes on me. Not human eyes, something older, patient, heavy. I spun, flashlight slicing through darkness, catching glimpses of movement at the edges. Shards of metal, shadows shifting in impossible ways. I couldn't tell if it was imagination, exhaustion, or the factory itself moving. A sound, soft, almost playful, echoed from somewhere far. A metal clang, a footstep. I froze, straining. It came again, closer, from behind a row of rusted machines. I inched forward. The sound stopped. I froze, holding my breath. And then a shadow flicked across the wall, a small figure, pale, fleeting, gone in an instant. My heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the space it had occupied. The room seemed alive now. Air shifted, not from wind, but weight, pressure. The shadows stretched, pulsing with an almost imperceptible rhythm. I noticed marks on the floor, scrapes, scratches, leading to a corner I hadn't seen. My hands shook as I followed them. The further I went, the colder, heavier the air became. I felt my own presence intruding on something that had existed long before me, something that did not forgive intrusion. At the far corner, I found a small door, half hidden behind a press. I bent down, pushing it open. A narrow stair led deeper. I peered down into the black, trying to see, trying to feel courage. Something whispered then, not words, just a sound curling in the ear, faint but insistent, like a breath against the nape of my neck. I jerked back. I wanted to leave. I wanted to close the door and never return. But curiosity, that stubborn, dangerous thing, pulled me closer. I took a deep breath and descended. The stairs groaned under my weight, echoing through the darkness. At the bottom, a corridor stretched endlessly, concrete walls slick with moisture, shadows pooling in the corners. I moved slowly, flashlight cutting a swath of light, each step measured. And I felt its presence, watching, patient. I could sense it, coiling in the darkness, waiting for a slip, a misstep, a hesitation. The corridor opened into a vast, empty chamber. Machines lay broken, twisted, as if abandoned mid-roar. Light from above leaked through cracks, thin beams in dust-choked air. And then I saw them, marks on the walls, low scratches, small handprints pressed into dust and grime. Something had been here, something small, something that had not left willingly. The air felt thick, almost tangible, pulsing with a memory I couldn't name. I turned, flashlight sweeping. Shadows flickered in impossible ways. The walls seemed to lean closer, ceilings lower. Every creak, every drip of water echoed like a footstep. And then I heard it clearly, a faint metallic clang from somewhere deep in the chamber. I froze, my heart pounded. The sound came again, followed by a whisper so faint I could not catch the words. It was deliberate, waiting, patient. I realized with cold certainty that the factory was not empty. It had never been empty. I retraced my steps, moving back through the corridor, stairwell, and finally into the main floor. Every shadow seemed alive now, flickering at the edges of vision. Sunlight slanted through broken windows, but it did nothing to chase away the presence. Even as I pushed toward the gates, even as I felt the outside air brush my face, the factory clung to me. Its emptiness had substance. Its silence had weight. I could still feel it breathing, watching, remembering. And I knew I would return. The gates of silence had opened for me, but they had not released me. I thought I knew what silence was. I thought I understood emptiness. But the factory had a voice, and it began speaking the moment I stepped deeper inside. Shadows stretched across the walls, shifting subtly. As if the machines themselves had memory. I blinked and the corner of my eye caught movement, just a flicker. But when I looked directly, the conveyor belts were still. Only still. No, they breathed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the metal pulsed, sagged, lifted, as if inhaling and exhaling in long, patient rhythms. My steps sounded different now. They were muted, softened, yet echoed in ways that made the vast hall feel smaller and tighter at once. I could feel the weight of air pressing against my chest, thick and moist, smelling of rust and old oil. The silence had thickened, almost tactile, and with it came an unsettling certainty. I was not alone. Not in the way a person is alone, but in the way a presence fills a room, a thing older than the walls, older than the machines themselves. I approached a bank of presses, their arms frozen mid-motion. My hand brushed the cold steel, and I felt it shift beneath my fingers, not physically, not like it moved, but like it reacted. A pulse ran through the metal, a subtle tremor like the heartbeat of a creature I could not see. I stepped back, breath hitching, and a shadow passed over the floor behind me. Not mine. Something lighter, smaller, impossible to catch, but undeniably there. My skin prickled. I could feel it watching, studying, measuring me. The corridor ahead narrowed, machines lining both sides, pipes twisting like veins. My flashlight flickered, casting uncertain light. For a moment a pattern emerged. Conveyor belts slightly askew, hoppers tilted, a wheel slowly rotating. Then stopped the instant I focused. I swore the press I had passed breathed again, its piston rising in the faintest, slowest rhythm. My heart pounded. Was it imagination? My mind cracking under the pressure of the air, the silence, the smell of something stale, metallic, sweet and coppery. Or was it something else? Something that had learned to wait, to breathe, to pretend stillness. I moved forward, careful, almost crawling through shadows that seemed to thicken around me. Footsteps from somewhere behind mirrored mine or mocked them. I spun, flashlight swinging. Nothing. But the cold, the metallic pulse, the faint thrum beneath the floor told me I was being followed, or perhaps accompanied. Not by a person, something else, something patient, watching me test its patience. A rusted crane towered above, cables hanging slack, swinging slightly. I froze. The tip of the hook moved just enough to catch the light, a slow, deliberate sway that had no wind. I blinked. When my eyes reopened, it had shifted again, closer to the floor, or was it me that had moved closer without noticing? I swallowed hard. The factory was testing me. Its breath was long and deliberate. Its pulse slow, rhythmical, suffocating in the way shadows cling to walls. I reached a control panel, its buttons yellowed, coated in dust. My fingers hovered, trembling. I touched one lightly. A click, nothing else, but the room responded. The air thickened, heavier still, like it had a heartbeat of its own. A belt creaked, turning just the fraction of an inch, then stopping. I whirled. Nothing. Only shadows, stretching, pulsing in response to me. Something was learning my patterns, my fears, my hesitations. I realized with icy certainty I had crossed into its domain. I pressed on through the hall of machines that seemed to breathe and remember. Pipes twisted over my head, dripping water in slow, deliberate intervals. Each drop echoed like a metronome. And somewhere deeper, a mechanical groan, long and low, vibrated through the floor. Not machinery, something mimicking machinery or machinery possessed by it. The air smelled sharper now, metallic with an edge of decay. My hands shook, my mouth dry. Every instinct screamed to leave. But curiosity, that dangerous, stubborn thing, kept me moving. Ahead, a press room opened up, vast and dim. Sunlight barely filtered through cracks in the roof. Machines towered like giants frozen mid-strike, and then I saw it. A shadow moved across the floor, a small, fleeting figure. I blinked. Nothing, but the air shifted. Cold brushed my neck, and a metallic clink echoed. I spun, flashlight slicing the darkness. Nothing, and yet everything seemed alive. The conveyor belts rose slightly, as if inhaling, then sank. The presses pulsed faintly, synchronizing, a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I took another step, and the air seemed to vibrate. A soft hiss like steam escaping, but different. Closer, I froze. From somewhere above, a pulley clanged lightly, then silence. My mind raced. Could machinery mimic life? Could steel breathe? Could shadows remember motion and intent? And then a flicker in the corner of my eye, a belt that had been still, twisting ever so slightly. I focused, and it froze. The factory mocked me, testing, teasing. A side door caught my attention, half ajar, hinges frozen but strained. I opened it slowly. A small room, dim, lined with cabinets. Tools lay scattered, some toppled, others arranged as if recently used. And here, faint scratches on the walls, vertical, horizontal, haphazard. Something small had clawed at the metal, something alive, or something that had been. My heart raced. A faint metallic whisper seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Not words, just sound. A hiss, a shift, a small metallic clink repeating, as if calling my name. I stepped back into the main hall, trying to convince myself I was tired, imagining movements that weren't there. But the factory would not allow such excuses. Shadows flickered, pulleys swayed, a press groaned faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that I could feel through my feet. My flashlight caught a conveyor belt in the far corner. It moved slightly again, slow, deliberate, rising and falling as if breathing. I gasped. My skin crawled. I realized I was not imagining this. The machines themselves had life. Or something had learned to move them. The air pressed tighter now, thick with anticipation. Each step was met with a subtle response, a pulley clinking, a press shifting, a belt rising fractionally. My flashlight flickered. For a second I swore the shadow at the end of the hall crouched, watching, waiting. I blinked. Gone. Only the rhythm of the machines remained, slow, insistent. I could feel them remembering, breathing, watching, patient. I moved toward the stairwell, intending to leave the main hall, but the factory resisted. A pipe above groaned, twisted, and a puddle reflected a shadow that was not mine. I froze. A cold wind brushed my cheek. I spun. Nothing. Yet the rhythm continued. Presses pulsing, belts breathing, shadows twitching. I realized with growing dread, it did not want me gone, not entirely. It wanted me aware, watching, feeling its presence. I descended the stairwell and the air grew heavier still. Moisture clung to my clothes. Rust smelled sharper. The rhythm of the machines persisted, pulsing, breathing, alive. At the bottom, a narrow corridor stretched before me, pipes lining the walls, shadows curling unnaturally. I moved slowly, each step measured, aware of the pressure, the heartbeat, the almost sentient silence that pressed in from all sides. A faint clanging, soft and deliberate, echoed from deeper in the corridor. I froze, footsteps, or machinery mimicking life. I turned, sweeping the flashlight. Shadows danced, twisting across walls, reflecting in puddles. Every pulse of the machine synchronized with my heartbeat. I shivered. The factory breathed, remembered, watched. It knew I was here. And I knew with a creeping certainty that leaving would not sever its awareness. I pressed onward, drawn to a doorway at the far end. Light barely seeped through, dust motes dancing in thin shafts. Inside, machines loomed like dormant giants. The floor was cracked, streaked with oil and rust. I noticed faint markings in the grime, small, hand-like, leading to a corner of the room. My breath hitched. The machines pulsed, belts rising slowly, pistons lifting fractionally, all synchronized in a subtle rhythm that made the air almost unbearable. And then I felt it. Eyes on me, not human, not watching from a distance, but pressing, patient, aware. Shadows twitched, belts shifted, a press rose fractionally. I froze. The metallic heartbeat quickened, a rhythm building in the air, in the steel, in the silence itself. I realized I had entered something alive, something older than the walls, older than the factory's memory, breathing in time with me, feeding on my awareness. I stumbled backward, flashlight swinging, illuminating twisted machines, metal ribs of conveyors, shadows that pulsed with intent. The air vibrated faintly, pressing against me. And then I understood. The factory did not want escape. It wanted acknowledgement. It wanted to be seen. Every shift, every breath of metal, every pulse of shadow insisted on it. I fled back through the corridor, up the stairwell, past presses and belts that rose subtly in response to my panic. The hallways stretched, shadows flickering, pulleys groaning in time with my steps. And even as I pushed through the gates and the night air struck my face, I could feel it. The factory still breathed, still waited, still remembered. I did not look back, but I knew, even in the safety of the street outside, that something had followed me. Or perhaps something had simply imprinted itself in my awareness. Machinery that breathed, shadows that watched, a factory alive in ways that could not be explained, yet undeniably real. And I knew, despite the cold night air, I would return. I found the office by accident. A side corridor barely lit, walls flacking like dead skin. The door was half ajar, the lock rusted. Inside, the air smelled different, older, heavier, like paper had soaked up decades of something terrible and secret. Dust motes floated in the shafts of my flashlight, catching in the thick, stale air. Cabinets lined the walls, drawers swollen with age. each one whispering promises I didn't want to hear. I pulled a drawer open. Files stacked and leaning, yellowed and brittle. Names, dates, job titles, most ordinary, banal operators, welders, laborers. But every so often a notation in jagged handwriting, a symbol, a number. And beside some of the names, the word fallen. My stomach clenched. At first I thought it meant died in the usual course of work, accidents. But the dates didn't match any recorded incidents. Some entries were decades old, some within the last few years. And the deaths weren't explained, just vanished. I ran my finger over a sheet. The handwriting was spidery, almost frantic. Lost in machinery, never recovered. Another, collapsed underground, body missing. My chest tightened. I counted dozens. The list went on year after year, a pattern forming in the margins, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I had a sense I shouldn't look, and yet I couldn't stop. Each name was a ghost reaching through the paper, pulling me closer. I pulled more files. Each drawer I opened revealed more names, more gaps in records, more unexplained disappearances. Some were children of workers visiting and listed briefly, then crossed out. I felt a cold weight settle behind my eyes. The factory wasn't just haunted by rust and shadows. It was haunted by history, by lives that had been swallowed and never returned, by something patient waiting. A file at the bottom caught my eye. Heavier, different. The cover read, Unclaimed Injuries 1957-1972. I opened it. The first sheet showed a young man, 18, listed as operating a press. Notes, found hours later, silent, eyes wide, no pulse, no marks of trauma. My hand trembled. No pulse, no marks. And yet the file made a point of recording the time of death with precision, as if the clock mattered more than the man. I flipped the page. Another name. Another time. Another strange notation. Observed movement after disappearance. My breath caught. Movement? In what? I realized I wasn't alone. The air had shifted. Heavy, low pressing. The machinery outside the office doors hummed faintly, as if sensing my focus, my attention on these old, forgotten deaths. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was imagination, but the pulsing rhythm outside matched the pattern I had seen in the files, slow, deliberate, unnerving. Every so often I caught a shadow at the corner of my vision, small, indistinct, but always gone when I turned. Something was moving. Something was learning. I sat on the edge of a chair, files spread before me. Names, ages, times of disappearance. Some were ordinary accidents, yes, but the majority were not. Every missing worker had one thing in common. The machinery was always nearby. A press, a conveyor, a crane, always. And the notes hinted at things no one could explain. Body recovered in parts unknown. Observed in hallways at night. Whispering heard before collapse. My stomach churned. I was staring at decades of systematic deaths, each one recorded in meticulous detail by someone who had survived, or perhaps someone who had not. A drawer slammed shut somewhere behind me. My heart leapt. I spun. Nothing. The room was still, but the shadows in the corners seemed to have shifted closer, waiting. The air smelled sharper now, metallic, and a faint vibration thrummed beneath my feet. I realized with a sinking certainty that the factory itself had noticed me. The files weren't just records, they were bait, invitations. The factory had orchestrated their collection, their loss, and now me. I leaned closer to the next sheet, hands shaking. The handwriting had changed in the later decades, looser, wilder, almost desperate. One entry from 1989. He watches, takes the young. We warn them, none listen, machines obey him, the walls remember. My pulse thundered. He nodded, someone or something watching, taking, and the machines obeyed. My eyes darted to the doorway. Shadows flickered across the frame. I whispered to myself, it's just shadows. But I didn't believe it. The files led me to a stack of diaries, handwritten logs from caretakers and foremen. The first few pages were mundane temperatures, machinery maintenance, but soon the entries shifted. Words like stairs, movement, and shadows. He waits in the hum of the machines. One caretaker wrote, I see them in the hallways, children, workers, sometimes both. They vanish into the walls. I hear whispers, but no mouths move. I cannot stop it. I cannot leave it. The words burned on my eyes. Whispers. Vanishing, movement. I felt the factory shift subtly, a vibration through the floor, a press twitching as if reading over my shoulder. I opened a drawer in the floor cabinet. Inside, old photos yellowed, edges fraying. Workers posed with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Machinery loomed behind them, enormous, threatening. And in one photo, I saw something impossible, a faint, blurry figure crouched in the corner. Not human, not machine, watching. And yet the figure was in every subsequent photo, always subtle, hidden in shadow, always present. My stomach tightened. It was patient, observant, timeless. A soft clink echoed in the office. I froze. My flashlight beam swept across the room, nothing. And yet I knew it had been there. Something small, light, deliberate. Every shadow now seemed alive, every breath of air carrying a weight I could feel pressing against my chest. I realized that this room, these files, the diaries, the photographs, they were warnings, or perhaps confessions. I couldn't tell. But one thing was clear: leaving would not remove the presence. It would follow, patient, waiting for the next misstep. I tried to gather myself. The pattern was undeniable. Deaths clustered around specific machinery at particular times. Not random, not accidents. The factory itself was a predator, older than the people who built it, older than the walls, remembering everything. And now I was part of the record. My pulse hammered in my ears, matching the low, mechanical heartbeat I could feel through the floor. I had trespassed, and the factory remembered. I pulled another file. Notes from 2003, 2007, 2012. The same story, disappearances, machinery implicated, witnesses terrified, but the details grew stranger. He reaches through steel, one read. Another, observed the machinery move itself to block exits, cannot leave. I swallowed hard. My own path out suddenly felt uncertain. The shadows beyond the doorway seemed to thicken. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I realized something else. The presence I felt in the hallways, the poolsing of the machines, the flicker of shadows, they were all connected. The factory itself was aware. The records weren't just history, they were active. A rhythm of observation and response extending through decades. Each disappearance had fed it, trained it, and now it awaited me. My chest ached. I had never felt such dread in a place of steel and dust. And yet the knowledge held a terrible clarity. I understood the pattern. And I understood the danger I had walked into. A small, almost imperceptible clatter echoed from a drawer across the room. I spun, flashlight cutting through dust and shadow. Nothing visible, but I felt it. Watching, moving, patient. Every instinct screamed to leave, but the files still lay before me. Each name, each date, each notation was a thread in a web I had already stepped into. My mind raced, heart pounding, as the air grew thick, almost viscous, pressing in from all sides. I gathered the files, shaking, careful not to disturb more than necessary. The factory seemed to respond. Shadows twisted, machinery groaned faintly, pulses aligning with my racing heart. I realized with a sinking certainty. The danger was cumulative, historical, omnipresent. The walls had remembered every death, every whisper, every shadow that had moved unseen. And now I had added my own presence to the record. I stepped toward the door. The air seemed heavier, almost resisting. A press in the next room groaned, belts rising fractionally. The shadows flickered. I could feel them calculating, observing. I did not look back. Each step felt like leaving part of myself behind. The files, the diaries, the photographs, they were not just history. They were the factory's eyes, ears, and memory. And they had been watching me as closely as I had been studying them. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold, but I could not shake the weight pressing behind my eyes. Decades of deaths, decades of observation, machinery that obeyed some unseen will. It had a rhythm, and I had learned a small part of it. But awareness was dangerous. Knowledge made the shadows thicker, the presence heavier. I walked away, heart pounding, mind racing, aware that my steps were recorded, my name perhaps already written somewhere on a brittle, yellowed sheet. Even now, hours later, I can feel it. Machinery that breathes, shadows that remember, deaths that whisper through the years. And somewhere, waiting, patient, the factory remembers me. The factory breathed differently at night. Shadows stretched across the walls, melting into the corners, folding themselves into machinery and piles of debris. I could hear the faint hiss of escaping air, the subtle clink of metal rubbing against metal, but I knew it wasn't just the building settling. There was something alive in the darkness, something that waited for me to notice. I stepped carefully over a broken conveyor belt, its teeth rusted and sharp. Every step stirred up dust, and every cloud of dust seemed to carry whispers. I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings creak, pipes groan, but the whispering persisted, faint and distant, like voices too quiet to make sense of yet too deliberate to ignore. I spun around. Nothing, but the feeling of eyes unseen, unblinking, pressed into the back of my neck. The air was thick with smoke from a long-dead furnace. It clung to my skin, filling my nostrils, and I felt my chest tighten. Through the haze, I thought I saw movement, fleeting, impossible. Something slipping from shadow to shadow, a shape that shouldn't be there, disappearing before I could focus. My flashlight trembled in my hand, casting long fingers of light that barely pierced the gloom. I came to a large open space, machinery towering like giants frozen mid-stride. I crouched behind a steel pillar, heart hammering. The shadows here seemed different, denser. I swear one moved just as I moved, keeping pace with me, a reflection that shouldn't exist. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity pinned me in place. I had to see it. I had to understand what was watching me. Footsteps echoed in the distance, light at first, hesitant, then closer, heavier. Not mine. Not human, or at least not wholly. They didn't follow the normal rhythm of walking. They skipped, fell, shuffled in ways that made the hairs on my arms stand. I froze. The echo seemed to circle, sometimes behind me, sometimes ahead, never direct, always uncertain. The factory itself had become an extension of the presence, amplifying every sound, every movement. I edged toward a doorway, the air changing as I moved. Smoke swirled at ankle height, curling around my boots like liquid shadows. I saw shapes through it, fleeting, too small to be adult, too quick to be normal. Children. Memories of the orphanage flickered in my mind, blending with the horrors here. I shook my head. No, that was impossible. And yet I couldn't deny the tiny, darting forms that vanished whenever I tried to stare directly at them. A soft hiss like air escaping a pipe drew me forward. I turned, and there it was, a shadow darker than the smoke itself, hunched near the remnants of a collapsed machine. It wasn't solid, not fully, and yet it occupied space in a way that pressed against reality. I stepped back. My foot hit a loose bolt. It clinked loudly. The shadow recoiled as if it felt the noise, then melted into the haze. My pulse raced. What was it? What had I disturbed? I kept moving, flashlight darting over fallen beams and twisted metal. Every corner, every darkened alcove seemed to hide something. Whispers rose from the smoke, barely audible, syllables breaking off mid-word, leaving me to imagine what was said. I swallowed hard. The sound was always just behind me, circling, teasing. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it, or if the factory was communicating, rehearsing some ancient, silent language I wasn't meant to understand. I reached a catwalk high above the floor. The shadows below writhed, and I felt vertigo not from height, but from the motion beneath me. Shapes moved, indistinct, impossible, and for a second I thought I saw the glint of eyes. Human? Animal? I couldn't tell. My fingers gripped the railing, trembling. Somewhere in the distance, a metallic clang echoed, loud enough to startle me, and the shadows below jerked violently, scattering like smoke in a sudden wind. I paused, breathing shallow. My flashlight illuminated a small corner where the smoke was thinner. Rusted machinery leaned into one another, forming angles that looked almost like figures. I could swear I saw one twist its head, a silhouette mimicking life. I stepped closer, compelled by fear and curiosity. The closer I got, the more I realized the machinery didn't cast ordinary shadows. It interacted, bending, shifting, as if guided by something unseen. A sudden gust of air snaked through the hall, cold and biting. I shivered, the flashlight flickering. The shadows shifted again, and I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of my vision, a fleeting form, small, darting across the catwalk. My heart jumped. Children? Workers? Or something older, something that had lingered here since before the factory was abandoned. I had no answers, only the gnawing certainty that I wasn't alone. The ceiling above groaned. Dust fell like rain, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward it, elongating unnaturally. I leaned forward, peering through the gaps in the catwalk. Shapes below moved in patterns that didn't make sense, swarming in some silent rhythm. I had the terrible sense that the factory itself had learned to anticipate my movements, adjusting the smoke and shadows to herd me, to watch me. I realized then that escape might not be straightforward. The place didn't want me gone. I descended carefully, boots scraping metal. Every echo of my steps seemed amplified, mirrored by other lighter taps that I couldn't place. The whispers grew louder, almost intelligible, fragments of words broken, teasing. I imagined I heard my name. I spun, flashlight sweeping the dark. Nothing. And yet the weight of attention pressed into me from all sides. The shadows were patient, waiting, observing, always just out of reach. I found a doorway leading to a side room, collapsed machinery spilling into the hall. Smoke pooled here, thick and almost alive. I crouched, listening. The shadows moved independently of light, stretching and folding in ways impossible. I glimpsed a figure, tall, thin, distorted, half in shadow, half in smoke, vanishing as soon as I tried to focus. My chest tightened. The factory had inhabitants beyond memory and decay, beings that thrived in silence and mist. I pushed forward, flashlight beams slicing through the haze. Small objects clattered in the distance, shifted in ways that suggested intent. I felt their gaze, felt it press into my mind. Every instinct screamed to leave, but something held me, an unspoken need to witness, to understand the movements in the smoke. The fleeting forms, the whispering echoes, the impossible silhouettes. They were teaching me, guiding me, testing me. A long corridor stretched before me, walls blackened with age. I stepped carefully. Footsteps echoed behind me again, soft but deliberate. I dared not turn. The shadows swirled differently here, following, converging, folding over themselves. I had the sense that the air itself had been waiting for this moment, that the factory had orchestrated the night to trap me in a pattern I couldn't yet comprehend. I paused halfway down the corridor. The smoke thinned, revealing the floor beneath, scratches, gouges, deep and erratic, as if something had dragged itself across the concrete repeatedly. I knelt, tracing one with my fingers. The metal filings under my nails seemed charged, electric. A whisper curled into my ear. I jumped, heart hammering. No one was there, and yet the sound had weight, direction, intention. The factory had a voice, subtle, woven into the motions of shadows and smoke. I continued, but the hallway seemed to lengthen unnaturally, stretching beyond memory, beyond expectation. Shapes flickered in the corner of my vision, sometimes human, sometimes grotesque, sometimes impossible. My breathing came in sharp bursts, each inhalation tasting of dust and iron. I realized I could never see them directly. Any attempt to focus made them vanish. Only the periphery held the truth of their existence. A metallic clang somewhere to my left made me spin. Nothing, but the shadows pulsed in response, converging briefly, then retreating. I felt them, their intent, their observation. And for the first time I understood this was no ordinary haunting. The factory itself was alive in some unnatural sense, a predator that didn't chase but observed, that didn't strike but waited. It cataloged, rehearsed, learned, and I had entered its domain. I came to the edge of the main hall. Smoke swirled in dense clouds, shadows writhing within it like living ink. Figures appeared briefly, darting between machinery, folding into walls, disappearing before recognition. I felt the weight of time here, decades of loss, echoes of those who had vanished, all layering on top of me, pressing, observing. I stumbled forward, nearly losing my footing. The factory exhaled, a low hiss vibrating through the floor. I was in its lungs now, surrounded by memory and intent. A small, almost imperceptible form darted past my leg. I froze. My flashlight caught only a glint, a reflection in smoke, a glimmer of something that shouldn't exist. I heard soft breathing, shallow, deliberate, echoing in the corridors. I whispered a name I didn't know, a prayer I didn't believe. The shadow paused, then vanished. My chest ached. I was being studied, catalogued, named in the silent ledger of smoke and darkness. I tried to leave, retracing my steps, but the factory didn't obey normal geography. Hallways stretched, shadows moved counter to my path, the air thickened, smoke curling around my boots. I could feel the attention shifting, flowing, almost liquid, pressing in, guiding me along some path I couldn't understand. And then it occurred to me. It didn't want to harm me, not yet. It wanted acknowledgement, recognition, the witness to its long memory. I stumbled into the night finally, coughing, lungs burning, the factory behind me alive with subtle, silent motion. Shadows pulsed behind windows, smoke lingering as though reluctant to let me go. I dared not look back. Footsteps, whispers, forms at the edge of perception. They all followed me in memory, in awareness, in a weight I couldn't shed. I knew I had survived, but I also knew I had not escaped. Even now, the shadows linger. I feel them in quiet moments, curling around corners, slipping through periphery. Smoke rises in my mind, forming impossible shapes, twisting, waiting. And somewhere always the factory remembers. The street was too quiet. No birds, no wind, nothing but the faint hum of my own footsteps on cracked asphalt. Houses leaned into one another like old friends who'd long stopped talking. Paint peeled in long ribbons, doors sagged on rusted hinges, and lawns had become wild gardens no one tended. I should have felt relief in the calm, but instead, the stillness pressed against me, heavy and expectant. I passed the first house on the left. Its windows were black, unbroken, like eyes staring straight through me. I wanted to keep moving, but curiosity kept me rooted. Something about the way the porch slanted, the way the swing hung in unnatural silence, felt deliberate, as if someone or something had left it that way just for me. The air smelled faintly of dust and damp wood, carried in on a breeze that seemed too light to move anything. And yet I could hear it, a soft creak, almost rhythmic, echoing from a distant house. Not the wind, not a stray branch, footsteps. I spun, flashlight sweeping the street. Nothing, just shadows pooling in driveways stretched long by the low sun. Each house seemed to whisper a story I wasn't supposed to hear. Mailboxes rattled, rusting letters clinging inside. A tire swing in one yard swayed slightly, though no wind touched it. My stomach tightened. The emptiness wasn't natural. There was a tension here, unseen, waiting. I stepped onto a cracked sidewalk, careful not to trip over the roots bursting through concrete. My boots kicked up dry leaves, but the noise didn't seem to reach the far end of the street. I glanced behind me. Nothing. And yet I felt the gaze, cold, patient, pressing into my back. I wanted to move faster, but something held me. Something curious, something watching me wonder. The second house had curtains drawn tight, yellowed with age. I peered through a small gap. Furniture lay scattered, coated in dust. A chair tilted at a sharp angle, a book open on the floor as though someone had left in a hurry. My pulse spiked. Had they left, or had they never been there to begin with? I couldn't tell. The light flickered faintly through a broken window. Shadows moved inside the room, fluid and uncertain. I jumped back, telling myself it was just the sun. A low groan came from the house behind me. Wood settling. My imagination. It was too soft, deliberate, carrying the weight of something alive. I quickened my pace, but the street seemed longer now, houses stretching farther than they should. The sidewalk cracked beneath my feet, yet no echo followed, no birds called, no dogs barked. Only me, moving through the stillness like an intruder. I reached a cul-de-sac where the houses were smaller, closer together. Every door hung open a fraction, every window darkened and silent. The air smelled heavier here, like damp clay mixed with something acrid I couldn't name. My flashlight cut through the gloom, and for a moment I thought I saw movement. A shadow crossing behind a curtain, vanishing as soon as I blinked. A porch light flickered on across the street. I froze. No wiring, no motion sensor, nothing connected. And yet it glowed for one heartbeat, then died. My heart pounded. Had I imagined it? The street returned to its unnatural calm, too calm as though holding its breath. I moved toward the center of the cul-de-sac. A small fountain lay cracked in the middle, its basin empty. Watermarks traced eerie, rust-colored patterns along the stone. I knelt, brushing dust aside, revealing something scratched into the edge. A word worn almost beyond recognition. It might have been stay, or go, or nothing at all. I couldn't decide, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. Behind me, a gate squeaked. Slowly, hesitantly, I spun around, empty yard, empty street. And yet the sound had weight, intention. I swallowed hard. The houses themselves felt aware, alive, leaning into me with silent patience. The shadows under porches thickened. The open windows seemed to follow my every step. I walked on, boots crunching dry leaves. Each yard I passed held something unusual. Toys scattered as if abandoned mid-play, dishes left on tables covered in dust, curtains fluttering though the air was still. I imagined footsteps in each room, someone or something watching me. The feeling wasn't fear yet. It was anticipation. A small mailbox rattled violently beside me. My flashlight fell on it, empty, but the sound had weight like metal on metal from inside. My pulse raced. I scanned the houses. The shadows flickered. One leaned forward, or maybe I imagined it. My mind jumped between possibilities too fast to settle on a rational explanation. I reached the end of the cul-de-sac. A single house faced me, windows black, door cracked open. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, thin and blue against the dim light. I didn't see a fire, didn't smell smoke, but the tendril twisted as if alive, inviting, warning. My legs moved toward it before I could question why. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and decay. Floorboards groaned under my weight. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, curling like fingers. Furniture sat in frozen poses, chairs tilted, tables dust-covered. I stepped forward, drawn by a sense of unfinished business in the space. A rocking chair in the corner swayed slowly, though no wind entered. The faint squeak of motion echoed through the house, teasing me, tugging at some long-forgotten memory I couldn't place. I touched the wall, tracing faded handprints that shouldn't have been there. Cold, slightly sticky. I looked down at the floor, more scratches, shallow, deliberate, like someone or something had moved against the wood repeatedly. A whisper of sound came from above, faint, human, yet not. I froze, listening. The sound faded. I told myself it was the house. It was empty. And then I felt it, a presence just behind me. Cold, patient, observing. I turned, flashlight sweeping the room. Nothing. My breath caught. The shadow in the corner shifted slightly, a movement I couldn't have imagined. Something alive or pretending to be. My heart raced, but curiosity held me rooted in place. I needed to know what it wanted, or maybe I wanted it to notice me. I explored further, stepping into the kitchen. Dishes sat on the counter as if someone had been interrupted mid-meal decades ago. Rusted appliances hummed faintly, though unplugged. A knife tipped over slowly, clattering to the floor as though guided by invisible fingers. I flinched. The sound echoed unnaturally, stretching across the empty street outside, amplifying the quiet. A staircase loomed ahead. Dust lay thick on the steps. I hesitated. Something at the top seemed aware of me. Shadows pooled, shifted, and pulled into the corners like black ink spreading on paper. I climbed slowly, every creak announcing my ascent. The presence intensified, coiling around me, brushing my mind. I couldn't see it, couldn't name it, and yet I felt its intelligence, its patience, its subtle amusement. Upstairs, the hallway stretched long and narrow. Doors lined each side, most closed, a few ajar. I stopped at one. The room beyond smelled of mildew and old paper. A child's toy lay on the floor, half buried in dust. I knelt, brushing it aside. Beneath it was a scrawled word scratched deep into the wood. Wait. I swallowed hard. I didn't know why, but I obeyed instinctively, stepping back, heart hammering, gaze flicking to shadows that moved just beyond perception. I didn't explore the other rooms. I didn't need to. The presence had made itself known, patient and silent. I could feel it even as I descended the stairs, each step echoing in a silence too complete, too deliberate. The houses waited, the shadows lingered, and the street outside stretched empty, too long, too quiet. I realized I had wandered into a place left behind for a reason. Not haunted by ghosts, but by something older, something that thrived in waiting. Stepping onto the street, I glanced back. The house I had entered stared at me, its windows like eyes. Shadows pooled under eaves, shifting slightly as if acknowledging me, cataloging me. I felt their gaze follow me until I turned the corner and the street fell out of sight. But the weight didn't lift. Even now, in daylight, I feel it pressing into memory, curling around my thoughts. A neighborhood left behind, but not empty. And I knew I would return. Not because I wanted to, but because the houses had left a part of themselves in me. The stillness, the patience, the anticipation. Something unfinished had imprinted itself, something that wouldn't let me walk away entirely. I stepped inside the first house that felt almost alive. The door protested with a slow groan, hinges stiff with age, and for a moment I thought the sound was more than wood on metal. The hallway stretched in front of me, narrow and dim, wallpaper yellowed and curling at the edges. Dust drifted in the pale light coming through cracked blinds, shimmering like particles suspended in time. The living room was frozen in routine. A couch sagged in the middle, cushions indented as though someone had just stood up. Coffee cups sat on the table, stained and empty, and a newspaper lay spread open, pages brittle. I reached out, hesitant, and touched the rim of a cup. Cold. Not from the air, just cold, as if it had waited decades for someone to notice. Family photographs hung crooked on the walls. Faces smiled, frozen mid-laughter, but the eyes, something in them shifted as I moved. My chest tightened. The smiles weren't welcoming. They were observing, quiet, waiting. I blinked, and the eyes seemed just slightly darker than before, or maybe my imagination had started to stretch thin. The kitchen held more evidence of interrupted life. Plates were stacked in the sink, silverware still arranged as if for a meal that had been abandoned mid-bite. The faucet dripped once, then stopped. I froze. No sound should have been here, but the house seemed aware of me, watching, reacting. I wondered how long it had been empty, and more importantly, why it felt so patient. I moved slowly, feet brushing the threadbare rug, careful not to disturb anything. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of mildew and faintly sweet decay. Cabinets opened with little resistance, revealing dried jars, labels faded beyond recognition. A calendar hung crooked, the month of April highlighted in faded red ink. The year? I didn't know. Time seemed irrelevant here. I found a chair at the dining table, pushed back slightly. I sat. The creak of wood echoed, unnaturally loud in the silence. I noticed scratches along the edge of the table, small lines that didn't make sense. Tiny etchings, letters almost erased by time. Wait, see, here. I couldn't be certain. Each word teased me, hinting at a story that had ended, or maybe had never begun. Upstairs, the bedrooms told the most intimate stories. A small bed, neatly made, pillow indented like someone had just slept there. Toys lay scattered on the floor. A music box on the dresser turned slowly as if recently wound, a faint melody curling through the air. I leaned closer. It stopped. Instantly. The silence that followed carried weight. One room had a dresser with drawers partially open. Inside, I found faded clothes folded with care. A scarf smelled faintly of mothballs and something warmer, human. I held it against my face and my stomach twisted. Memories that weren't mine pressed into me. Laughter, arguments, whispered secrets. The house didn't just preserve objects. It preserved echoes of life, shadows of existence that refused to leave. I noticed a photograph half buried under a stack of letters on a desk. A family posed in front of the same house I had entered. Children smiled, a man and woman standing proudly behind them. But the photo was strange. The man's eyes were blurred, smudged as if someone had tried to erase them. My fingers trembled as I touched the frame. Why would anyone do that? And who had been here to smear it? The floorboards groaned beneath my weight as I walked the hallway again. Shadows stretched unnaturally, pooling at the corners, following my movements with subtle shifts. One shadow seemed to detach from the wall, moving slightly ahead of me, guiding me, warning me, I couldn't tell which. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. I told myself it was imagination, but the presence lingered, patient and unseen. In the living room, a chair rocked slowly. No breeze, no visible movement. I approached cautiously, flashlight shaking in my hand. The chair stopped when I was a step away. My reflection in the window behind it showed someone or something standing just behind me. I spun. Empty room. The air was thick, as if breathing alongside me, waiting for me to notice its absence. I found the attic next. The stairs were steep, dust coating each step like powder. My flashlight flickered briefly, shadows dancing along the ceiling. Boxes sat in neat stacks, labeled in careful handwriting. Toys, clothes, letters. I opened one. A child's drawing, colors faded to brown and gray. A figure in the corner of the paper was scribbled over, lines jagged and aggressive. The child had tried to hide something, or warn someone. I couldn't tell. A breeze touched my neck. I froze. The air upstairs was stale. No windows were open. The sensation lingered, a whisper along my skin. Something was near, not visible, not solid, but aware of me, tracking, waiting. I forced myself to move deeper into the attic, heart racing. The boxes seemed taller now, corridors forming between them, shadows pooling like ink. One box fell, tipping toward me. I caught it, muscles tensed. Inside, a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. I untied it slowly, revealing correspondence between a mother and her child. Words of love, worry, instruction. Then a final letter never sent, describing someone watching from the street, someone who shouldn't be there. My stomach churned. The house had always known. It had witnessed every fear, every moment of vulnerability. I descended, hands shaking. The house felt tighter, as if inhaling around me, narrowing corridors, compressing space. Each room I passed felt aware of my scrutiny. I realized then the truth. It wasn't the emptiness that unsettled me. It was the persistence of life past, the memory of people who had left traces too vivid to ignore. In the kitchen I paused. A spoon on the counter shifted slightly. My head snapped up. Nothing. Then I noticed the faint outline of footprints in the dust. Not mine, smaller, child-sized, following me, always just out of reach. My pulse thumped in panic, yet curiosity rooted me. I wanted to know where they led, though I knew somehow that I didn't. Back in the living room, I studied the photographs again. Faces smiled, but eyes shifted subtly as I moved. It wasn't trick of the light, I knew it. The house remembered. It had remembered every detail, every day, every life. And now it was cataloging mine. I felt it in the way shadows pooled, in the chill that crawled along the floor, in the lingering scent of old food, dust, and sweat. I opened the front door, stepping outside. The street looked unchanged, patient, waiting. I wanted to leave, to put distance between myself and the silent observers inside. Yet a part of me lingered, drawn to the house's secrets, to the lives paused in its walls. Something whispered in memory, names, laughter, cries. I couldn't tell if it was the wind or the house itself. But I shivered. The neighborhood seemed quieter now, if possible. The street stretched long, houses leaning into one another, all windows dark except mine. I knew I hadn't explored everything, not by far. Each room I had touched, each object I had moved had left a trace of me behind. And I realized with sudden clarity that the house, and maybe the street, had left something in me as well. I walked away slowly. The air was lighter outside, though not free of tension. I could feel eyes on my back, even from a distance. I wondered how long it would last. Hours, days, weeks. And whether I would ever forget the precise angles of chairs, the tilt of frames, the smell of the kitchen, the way the shadows had waited patiently for me to notice. I glanced back once more. The house looked like any other from the outside. Harmless, but I knew better. Inside, it was alive with memory, alive with observation. It would remain there, recording every detail, patient, waiting. And somewhere deep in me, I knew I'd be drawn back. I didn't want to, yet a part of me hoped I would. The street swallowed me again, empty and patient. I walked on, boots crunching on leaves and gravel, haunted not by ghosts but by the traces of life past, carefully preserved, stubbornly waiting. And as I disappeared around the corner, I knew one certainty. The house and its memories were not done with me. The hallway narrowed as I moved toward the back of the house. Shadows pooled along the floorboards and the air grew heavier, colder. I noticed the basement door at the far end. A simple wooden slab, paint peeling, hinges rusted, yet it radiated a presence I couldn't name. It was untouched, almost reverent, as if it had been waiting for someone or something to return. I knelt, brushing my hand over the doorknob. Cold metal, too cold. My fingers recoiled instinctively, and for a second I thought I felt it pulse, subtle, almost like a heartbeat beneath my skin. A shiver ran down my spine. Why would a basement door, of all things, feel alive? The floorboards creaked under my weight as I crouched lower, listening. Silence. No wind, no distant traffic, nothing but the faint, irregular ticking of a clock somewhere deep in the house. And yet there was something else. A subtle scraping sound, faint, almost imperceptible, coming from behind the door. Someone or something had been down there recently. I hesitated. My heart thudded against my ribs, but curiosity rooted me. Slowly, I turned the knob. The door groaned as I pushed it open, and the darkness beyond swallowed me whole. A single beam from my flashlight sliced through the gloom. Dust motes danced lazily like floating memories. The basement smelled of damp earth and something else metallic, bitter, lingering. My boots echoed against the bare concrete floor. I moved cautiously, flashlight scanning. Shelves lined the walls, covered in a fine layer of dust. Old tools lay scattered, handles worn, blades dulled. But someone had been here. Footprints pressed lightly into the dust, small and deliberate, leading deeper into the shadow. I followed them, each step heavier than the last. The air felt thicker as I descended, as if the basement itself exhaled in slow, measured breaths. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly, though I hadn't touched it. Its weak glow revealed a corner where the dust had been disturbed. Objects were stacked haphazardly, boxes, crates, papers, but something about them suggested recent activity. I crouched to inspect a crate. The lid had been forced open, splinters of wood jutting outward. Inside were old photographs, documents, journals. I picked one up, flipping through yellowed pages. Names, dates, notes about the house, the family, and warnings. Odd little scribbles scratched in the margins. Don't look. They watch. Never stay too long. My pulse quickened. Someone had written this not decades ago, but recently. A cold draft whispered past my neck. I spun. Nothing. Shadows clung to the corners, moving just slightly, imperceptibly, as if adjusting to my presence. I could feel it, the sensation of being observed, measured, tested. The basement wasn't just a space, it was aware, patient, waiting. I stepped toward a set of shelves that leaned precariously. Dust was disturbed along the edge, showing evidence of someone or something having brushed past. I could almost trace the path, from the crates around the workbench and toward the back wall where a small door, hidden behind a stack of boxes, had been left ajar. My hand shook as I approached it. Faint scratches marked the wood, recent. Something had passed through here. Something had entered or left without my noticing. I pressed my ear against the door. Silence. And yet, a faint rhythm, subtle, almost like breathing. I forced it open. The space beyond was smaller, colder, darker. My flashlight revealed concrete walls, damp and mottled. The floor was wet in patches. Footprints led to a corner where a box had been overturned. Papers lay scattered. One sheet, yellowed at the edges, had a sketch, rough, childlike, of a figure standing in the basement, its eyes dark voids. A hand reached from the shadows toward a smaller figure. My stomach churned. The drawing was old, but it felt alive. A faint tapping began, echoing against the walls. I froze. It wasn't consistent, random, almost like a slow heartbeat. The sound seemed to come from multiple directions, yet I could pinpoint none. I whispered aloud, though I knew no one would answer. "Who's there?" My voice sounded weak, swallowed immediately by the air. The footprints in the dust shifted subtly. I stepped back, heart hammering, flashlight scanning rapidly. One print, deeper than the rest, led away from the hidden door toward the far wall. I followed it. On the wall, smeared in dust and dirt, were letters, words scrawled as though scratched by nails. "Leave." I stumbled back, almost falling. Who or what had done this? How recent was it? A shadow moved just beyond the corner of my eye. I blinked. Gone, I whispered to myself, trying to rationalize it. Basement air plays tricks. Eyes adjust. Shapes shift. But the sense of being followed, studied, never left me. I felt it like a weight pressing from behind, a cold, invisible presence marking my every step. I moved toward the far wall. There, a small hatch in the floor, unnoticed until now. Dust had been brushed aside recently, streaks running outward as if something or someone had been lowered or pulled through. I crouched, peering inside. Darkness deeper than the rest of the basement stared back. I felt the air here differently, heavier, almost sentient. My pulse spiked. Part of me wanted to run, to close the door, to pretend I hadn't seen it, but curiosity anchored me. I lifted the hatch. The hinges groaned. Below, a narrow shaft led down, impossibly deep. The smell of damp earth and rot hit me. A faint sound echoed upward, soft, deliberate, almost like breathing. My hands shook as I held the hatch open. I wanted to look to see, but the shadows seemed to pull me back, tugging at my instincts, warning me. A box tumbled from the upper shelves, startling me. Papers spilled across the floor, one catching my foot. I bent to pick it up and froze. It was a letter, recent, the handwriting familiar and impossible. It mirrored the style of the older journals in the house, yet fresh, as if someone had written it yesterday. They never leave. They only wait. Now you know. My flashlight flickered. The shadow at the far wall lengthened, reaching toward me, though nothing moved. I stumbled back, breathing heavily. The basement felt alive, aware of my fear, feeding on it, shaping it, bending the space around me. I realized then that the house didn't just store memory. It stored attention, and I had become part of it. I scrambled toward the main basement door, but the air seemed thicker here, each step a struggle. Footsteps, mine or not, echoed behind me, matching my pace. I dared not look. The sense of being pursued wasn't malicious. It was patient, deliberate. The house was testing me, measuring my resolve, waiting to see what I would do. Reaching the door, I paused. The light from upstairs seemed distant, almost artificial. I wanted to leave, yet a part of me hesitated. The unseen presence lingered, not entirely hostile, but impossible to ignore. I turned the knob, and the door resisted, as if holding me back, reluctant to let me leave its domain. Finally, it gave. I emerged into the hallway. The basement door closed behind me with a soft click, but the echoes remained. A faint tapping continued somewhere below, fading slowly but not entirely. I knew the house hadn't released me. It would remember my fear, my curiosity, my presence, and someday it might call me back. I walked through the empty rooms, back toward the front door. Every photograph seemed to watch me. Every shadow stretched just slightly toward me. I felt the weight of eyes in the air, patient and knowing. The house was alive with history, with attention, with a persistence I could not shake. Outside, the light of the afternoon street seemed pale, fragile, as if it barely touched the houses that had stood for decades, silent and observing. I glanced back at the basement window. Darkness lingered behind the glass, unbroken, undisturbed. And yet I knew something or someone had been there, and it had not forgotten. The street swallowed me as I walked away, but the basement remained. Its silence was not empty. It breathed, it waited, and it had marked me. And I knew, somewhere deep in my mind, that I had left more than footprints behind. The house, the basement, the shadows, they were patient, and I would not be free of them. I pressed my ear against the cold plaster of the wall. At first there was nothing but silence, the faint hum of distant traffic outside, the whisper of wind through broken shutters. Then I heard it, a soft murmur, almost like someone speaking just beyond comprehension. Not words, not sentences, but fragments, names, laughter, a lullaby half remembered, warped and stretched. My pulse spiked. The wall felt impossibly solid, yet I could sense the vibration, as if the voices had found a way through. I staggered back, but my curiosity anchored me. The house had been empty for years. Who could be speaking now? I moved slowly down the hallway, flashlight cutting through the gloom. Every room I passed seemed to echo the voices differently. The living room whispered in low, warm tones, memories of family dinners I'd never witnessed. In the kitchen, a child's laughter bounced faintly off the cabinets. I swallowed hard. The sound wasn't coming from any one place. It came from the house itself. I stopped at a doorway. The bedroom beyond was dark, the curtains torn and fluttering slightly. A voice, a girl's voice, called softly, almost like she was asking for help, but the words weren't clear. My skin prickled. I wanted to run, but I stepped inside. The air was heavy with dust and something else, something sweet and cloying, like old perfume long forgotten. I leaned closer to the wall. The voice grew more distinct, repeating a phrase I couldn't quite understand. Then a different voice joined in, older, deeper, blending with hers. Their tones overlapped, creating a strange harmony, a memory that wasn't mine but pressed against the edges of my mind. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun, flashlight darting across the room. Nothing. The room was empty, yet the voices continued, now joined by a soft rustling as if curtains were moving on their own. I told myself it was the wind, that my mind was playing tricks, but the voices weren't random. They were purposeful, layered, almost aware of me. I followed them down the hallway. Each step made the whispers shift, responding to me. A chair squeaked behind me. I froze. The voices paused, then resumed, slower now, deliberate. It was as if the house was testing me, measuring my courage, gauging my attention. I reached the study. Shelves sagged with old books, papers scattered like fallen leaves. I crouched, brushing my hand over a notebook. The paper was yellow, the ink faded, yet the writing was legible. They hear you. They remember you. My breath caught. How recent could this have been? The house had been empty for decades, yet someone or something was leaving messages for me. A new voice emerged, lower, gruffer. It wasn't a memory. It was present, alive. The air thickened. I felt it behind me before I saw it, a cold pressure against my spine. I turned slowly. Nothing moved. Shadows hugged the corners, watching. The voices swelled, overlapping, layering memory with intention until I could barely tell where the past ended and the present began. I pressed my hand to the wall again. The plaster was warmer here, almost pulsing. The whispers grew frantic, urgent. I heard a name, my name echoed softly. My heart slammed against my chest. The house knew I was here. It remembered me. It had been waiting. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The sound reverberated through the rooms. The voices shifted, laughing softly, mocking, sorrowful, pleading. I realized then that the house wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. It wasn't spirits trapped. It was memory made sentient, emotion made audible. Every voice, every fragment pressed against me like water through a sieve, impossible to resist. A drawer opened slowly in the study, though I hadn't touched it. Papers rustled inside. I approached cautiously, flashlight trembling in my hand. A photograph slid out, landing face up on the floor. A family portrait. The eyes of the parents seemed to follow me, unnervingly real. A child's hand pointed, not at the camera, but at me. My stomach knotted. How could an object remain so intentional? The voices shifted again. A woman's whisper, soft and mournful, repeated a word over and over. I listened closely. Return, return, return. Each repetition like a heartbeat, hypnotic, pulling me forward. The words weren't a threat, not exactly. They were a plea, and yet the intent behind them pressed against me with weight. I moved toward the stairs. The hallway seemed longer, narrower, shadows stretching unnaturally as I walked. The voices followed, now layered with murmurs I couldn't identify, tones that didn't belong to human mouths. I pressed my palm to the railing. Cold, ice cold. And then faintly I felt it, a vibration like the thrum of something massive beneath the house. I stopped at the landing. The master bedroom door loomed ahead. The whispers concentrated here, voices overlapping in a chaotic chorus. I felt dizzy, the air thick with memories, fears, intentions not my own. I forced myself forward, hand on the doorknob. The door resisted slightly, as if reluctant to reveal what lay beyond. I pushed it open. The room was empty. Dust floated in weak sunlight, filtering through cracked blinds. But the voices were here, concentrated, circling me. I spun, flashlight darting, and caught a figure in the corner. A shadow, vaguely humanoid, flickering at the edge of perception. It didn't move toward me, didn't retreat. It simply existed, watching. I swallowed, forcing my voice out. Who are you? A pause, then a single phrase whispered from everywhere at once. We are the walls. My stomach dropped. Not a person, not a ghost. The house itself, alive in memory and voice, speaking through the echoes of past lives. My skin prickled. I tried to step back, but the floor seemed to stretch, the walls bending subtly. My flashlight flickered. When the beam stabilized, the shadow was closer, indistinct, and the voices had changed. Pleading, laughing, threatening, consoling. layered impossibly into a soundscape that filled every corner of the room. I backed into the hallway. The whispers followed, descending the stairs behind me, circling, rising and falling like the tide. My heart pounded. I realized then the voices weren't random. They guided me, tested me, gauged my fear and resolve. Every step I took, they shifted. Every pause, they pressed closer. The front door appeared ahead, pale light bleeding through its cracks. I ran, but the voices surged, overlapping with memories that weren't mine. I heard a child crying in the dining room, a man shouting in the kitchen, footsteps packing the hallway upstairs. Each sound layered, growing louder, pressing against my senses until I staggered, almost collapsing. I slammed the door behind me, breaking the connection. Silence. The air outside felt thin and fragile, but the memory lingered, pressing at the edges of my mind. I could still hear faint echoes, soft, distant, teasing. The house hadn't stopped speaking. It was patient, waiting for me to return, for curiosity to pull me back inside. I glanced back. The windows of the house reflected the empty street, quiet and still. But I knew the quiet was deceptive. Inside, every room, every wall, every creaking floorboard held voices, memories layered and sentient. And they remembered me. They had waited, and now they had seen. As I walked away, the sun fell lower. Shadows stretched across the street, reaching toward me like fingers. The voices whispered faintly still, carried on the wind, or was it memory, blurring past and present? I shivered, knowing the house had not forgotten, and neither had I. A part of me remained inside, listening, waiting, entwined with walls that remembered everything. The last thought, as I stepped onto the cracked sidewalk, lingered uncomfortably. Had the house only been speaking to me, or had I spoken to it first without realizing? And somewhere inside, I knew the answer would come one day. I stepped outside and the door clicked shut behind me. The sound was startling in its finality, sharp against the soft, settling dust of the abandoned house. For a moment, I just stood there on the cracked porch, letting the wind carry the whispers I'd left inside. But they didn't fade, not completely. They lingered, woven into the silence like a second skin I couldn't shed. The street stretched before me, empty, overgrown with weeds pushing through fissures in the asphalt. The houses were lifeless, their windows dark and watchful, yet I felt them observe me. Every movement I made seemed exaggerated under their gaze. I walked slowly, trying to convince myself it was just imagination, but the feeling stuck to me, clinging like wet cloth. I glanced back. The house loomed silently, the shadows inside shifting faintly against broken curtains. For a second I thought I saw a figure at the top of the stairs, just a glimpse, quick as a blink, and then nothing. My stomach tightened. My hand reached instinctively to my chest, as if feeling for my heart might keep it from escaping. The voices, the memories, didn't follow me in full, but fragments clung to the edges of my awareness. A child laughing, a man calling for someone, a woman whispering a name I didn't know. They weren't threats, but they weren't comforting either. They were unfinished thoughts, hungering for recognition, for someone to listen and remember. And now I was leaving without answers. I moved down the street, but every house felt like a potential trap. Their windows reflected me oddly, the glass darker than it should have been, hints of movement I couldn't place. I quickened my pace, though not enough to shake the sense of eyes tracking me. The world outside seemed too quiet, unnatural in its calm. I paused at a corner. The wind shifted and carried a whisper, soft, urgent, almost pleading. I turned sharply, expecting to see someone, anything, but the street was empty, and yet I felt it, someone or something, watching from just beyond the line of sight. My pulse quickened, breath catching in the hollow of my chest. I wanted to convince myself I was safe, that leaving the house meant leaving its influence. But leaving had changed nothing. Every step I took carried a new layer of awareness. I noticed details I'd missed before. A window slightly ajar, a swing swaying despite no wind, a shattered mailbox with mail scattered in patterns that seemed deliberate. My mind raced. Had someone been here recently? Or was it the house, somehow reaching beyond its walls, imprinting its memory onto the world outside. I tried to focus on something ordinary. The sunlight catching on a puddle, a bird landing on a fence post, the wind rustling the leaves. Tiny anchors to reality. But the feeling persisted, a weight pressing from behind my eyes, making the hairs on my neck stand on end. I felt pursued, though no one was there. I reached my car and leaned against it, trying to steady myself. The engine hummed under my touch. I didn't start it immediately. My mind clung to the house, replaying every whisper, every shadow, every corner of the rooms I had explored. How had I survived without seeing the full extent of it? What else had I missed? What had been watching me the whole time? As I drove away, the neighborhood slipped past in slow, distorted images. The houses seemed to pulse, breathing quietly, waiting for me to return. And in that pulse, in that rhythm of empty streets, I sensed a message I couldn't decode. The house didn't care about my leaving. It didn't need me inside to watch me. The memory of me followed, tethered invisibly, embedded in the empty spaces I had walked through. I tried to shake it off. I turned on the radio, static, just static. A song began and stopped mid-verse, replaced by a low, distorted murmur I could almost recognize. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The car moved forward, but I felt as though I hadn't left at all, that the house, the voices, the shadows had folded the world behind me, keeping me inside its gaze. Traffic lights turned green, yellow, red. Time moved forward in a mechanical way, but the unease inside me remained suspended, unyielding. Every passing tree and telephone pole seemed to echo the rhythm of the house, each shadow bending slightly, reaching. I told myself it was paranoia, but deep down I knew the truth. Some part of that house had followed me. Some part of it had never wanted me to leave. I pulled off to the side of the road, needing air, needing distance. My car was still running, the engine thrumming beneath me, the street around me quiet. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. The whispers were faint now, layered beneath the mundane noise of the world, but I could still hear them, soft and relentless. Names, fragments, echoes of laughter. The house had not stopped speaking. It never would. I thought of the shadow in the master bedroom, the pulsing walls, the photographs that seemed to reach for me. Every step away from the house had felt lighter physically, heavier mentally. It wasn't just memory I was carrying, it was presence. I carried a weight now, one I couldn't name, and I realized it would not leave with me. It would follow. Watch. Wait. The sky turned a bruised purple as evening approached. Streetlights flickered to life, haloing the empty houses in pale yellow. Their windows glimmered faintly, as if reflecting the last remnants of the voices I'd escaped. My reflection in a passing window startled me. Wide eyes, pale face, tight lips. I didn't recognize myself entirely. The house had left a mark. I reached a convenience store, parking under the harsh fluorescence. Inside, the clerk didn't look up. The hum of refrigerators, the chime of the door, the quiet murmur of a television in the corner, mundane sounds. But my nerves felt raw, taut. Every surface seemed like it could hide a memory, a shadow, a voice waiting to slip back into my perception. I forced myself to look at the aisles, at the products, at the people. I tried to anchor myself to the ordinary. Outside again, I walked to my car. The wind carried something I couldn't name, something between a sigh and a call. I stopped, scanning the street, the houses, the trees. Nothing moved, yet the feeling persisted. Behind my eyes, at the edge of hearing, I sensed the presence again, patient, undisturbed, undeterred by distance. I got into the car, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road. The streets were emptier now, shadows long and shifting. My headlights picked out cracks in the pavement, weeds sprouting through broken concrete, and for a fleeting second, I imagined the shadows curling toward me, invisible tendrils stretching from the houses I had left behind. Every mile felt heavier. Every passing car seemed oblivious to the tension that wrapped around me. I tried to reason, to convince myself it was a trick of imagination. But it wasn't imagination. I could feel it in my chest, at the base of my skull, the lingering eyes, the unspoken questions. I had left the house, but I hadn't left it. I reached the edge of town, the houses thinning, the empty streets giving way to open fields. The air felt lighter, fresher, yet the memory persisted, embedding itself in my perception. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The town was behind me, darkening under the twilight, but the unease remained. Somewhere in those empty streets, in the quiet rooms, in the pulsing walls, something waited, and I knew I would hear it again. I drove faster, needing distance, needing the ordinary certainty of asphalt and traffic signs. But every shadow flicking across the road, every rustle of wind through the trees made me jump. I realized that leaving had not ended the story. It had only opened a new chapter, one I had not chosen, one that would unfold whether I wanted it to or not. As night fell fully, the highway stretched ahead, black and empty. I tried to push the memory aside, tried to focus on the road, the headlights, the hum of the tires on asphalt. But at the edge of perception, a whisper lingered, a fragment of a voice calling softly, pleading, patient. A question I could not answer, a presence I could not escape. I told myself it was over, that I had survived, that I had walked out. But the truth was different. The house, the memories, the shadows, they had followed. They would follow. And the questions it left behind would echo in me long after the streetlights faded behind me. And I knew, somewhere in the folds of distance and memory, the house was waiting, waiting for the next moment of curiosity, waiting for the next step, waiting for me. The hilltop rose out of the fog like a black wound against the dying light. I hadn't noticed the road ending until it dropped off into mist, the manor looming above like a sentinel I hadn't invited. Its windows caught the last amber of the sun, glinting faintly as though aware of me. I could feel the air shift, heavy and moist, carrying a scent that was not quite earth, not quite decay, but something in between. Every step on the gravel crunching beneath my boots sounded louder than it should have, a percussion I didn't want anyone to hear. The gate hung open, rusted, swaying slightly even though the wind was still. I paused, hand hovering over the latch, and a thought struck me. Had someone or something left it like this on purpose? The hairs along my neck stood, and I felt an urge to turn back, to flee down the twisting hill, but curiosity anchored me in place. The manor's facade was older than memory, stone blackened with age and streaked with green and gray. The windows were too numerous, too dark. I thought I glimpsed movement in one, a flicker in the corner of my vision, but when I looked directly, nothing existed there. The fog shifted, curling along the walls like smoke from a dying fire, and the house seemed to exhale it toward me, a slow, deliberate breath. I approached the front steps. The wood beneath my handrail was cold, slick with moisture. I could smell rot mixed with the lingering sweetness of something burned. The door was massive, made of oak so old it looked almost petrified. I tried the handle, locked. Of course it was locked, but the lock was old, rusted, and the keyhole gaped like a dark eye. My pulse sped. There was a sound behind me, soft, a scrape of stone against stone. My body tensed. I spun around. The hill was empty. Mist swallowed everything below the crest, making the world disappear. I glanced back at the door. The keyhole seemed to beckon, a tiny dark mouth opening and closing. I pressed my ear against it. Silence. Then the faintest thump like a heartbeat from inside. I stumbled backward, shaking my head. I told myself it was the fog pressing against the walls, the wind carrying echoes. But deep down I knew it was. Something was here waiting. Something that wanted to be acknowledged. I circled the house, keeping to the path that ran along the side. The fog thickened as I moved, blotting out the sun completely. Shadows pooled under the eaves, blacker than the night creeping over the hill. I passed a window, half shattered, and saw furniture covered in sheets. Shapes under the fabric reminded me of bodies, arms, torsos, the tilt of a head frozen in an impossible angle. My stomach knotted. I told myself they were just old chairs, just tables. But the tilt, the subtle human quality, made my chest tighten. A sudden breeze brushed my neck. I froze. It wasn't wind. It was deliberate. I heard it, faint breathing, shallow and hesitant, coming from inside. My mouth went dry. I wasn't alone. I wanted to run, but the hill's slope made retreat awkward, and my feet were rooted by some impulse I didn't understand. I was drawn to the manor, to the whispering presence I could almost but not quite hear. I found a side door, smaller than the front, painted gray and faded to the point of losing any original color. The handle gave easily. I twisted it, and it opened with a groan that felt like a scream muffled by distance. The threshold was black. Inside, the smell was worse. Damp mold, something metallic underlying it. My boots sank slightly into the soft floor, water pooling beneath decades of neglect. Light from outside fell in shards, illuminating dust motes dancing lazily, like tiny ghosts suspended in the air. The first room I entered was a foyer, wide and cavernous. Paint peeled from the walls, curling like dead skin. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, some of its crystals missing, the remaining one swinging slightly as though nudged by invisible fingers. The silence was deafening. I noticed the echoes of my own movement, but they weren't quite right. Too heavy, delayed, like the house had absorbed my steps and was mocking them back. I took another step. A floorboard creaked. I froze. Another one. I realized then that the house had a rhythm, its own pulse. Every groan of timber and shift of stone was part of it, and I, intruder, had entered that rhythm. I tried to follow the path forward toward the staircase, but my attention kept snapping to shadows. They moved just out of the corner of my vision, darting behind walls, slipping over the edges of doors. I thought I saw them twist, almost animate, but each time I turned my head, there was nothing. I reached the base of the stairs. The wood was warped and slick, and as I touched the railing, a shiver ran up my arm. I noticed scratches in the banister, deep, jagged, as if someone or something had climbed in haste. My mind raced. Had I missed signs of life here, or was the house itself alive? The thought made me laugh quietly, nervously, but the sound didn't reach the ceiling. It hung there, bouncing back at me from walls and windows, distorted. I climbed a few steps. The air grew colder. A foggy condensation clung to the walls, dripping in thin streams. I felt eyes on me. I couldn't see them, but the awareness of being watched pressed down like a weight on my shoulders. My ears caught it then, a faint whisper almost beneath hearing curling around my name. I stopped, listening. The house was speaking, or someone inside was, and I hadn't realized I was the one being summoned. I continued upward, slower now. Each step felt like an effort against gravity, against some force pulling me back down. At the landing, the hallway stretched into darkness. Doors lined both sides, some slightly ajar, others closed tightly. From one ajar doorway came a smell of smoke, faint and acrid, like a candle burned down to black wax. I wanted to look inside, but fear anchored my feet. My hand hovered over the nearest door handle. I didn't touch it, not yet. A sudden sound made me jump, a knock, soft but deliberate, coming from somewhere deep in the manor. I strained to locate it. It came again, closer this time. 3 slow knocks, measured, then silence. I could feel the weight of the house shift, almost like it had inhaled, waiting for my response. I took a breath and opened the nearest door. The room was empty. A bed covered with a moth-eaten quilt, a small dresser with its drawers pulled half open. The smell of old smoke lingered. Yet there was something else. Footprints, faint, pressed into the dust on the floor, leading toward the far corner. I stepped closer. They stopped abruptly mid-step, like the person who made them had vanished into the air. My pulse raced. The house had moved them, or maybe someone else had. I turned toward the hallway. Shadows stretched, twisting unnaturally, and I thought I saw a figure flicker past at the edge of vision. Heart hammering, I spun. Nothing. But I could feel it, breathing just beyond comprehension, waiting, patient. The manor had accepted me, perhaps, or at least noticed, and now it expected me to continue. I backed out of the room, keeping my gaze on the dark corners of the hallway. My mind raced with questions I didn't want answers to, but couldn't stop seeking. Who had been here last? What had been alive in this house before me? And what, if anything, would follow me if I left? At the top of the stairs, I stopped. The sunset had vanished, leaving the fog thick and opaque outside the windows. The air inside smelled of cold stone, mildew, and something faintly human. I realized then that the manor wasn't just a building. It was a living memory, breathing slowly, deliberately, pressing itself into anyone who dared enter. And I had dared. The air inside was heavier than the fog outside, sticky with dust that clung to my lungs with every breath. I stepped over the threshold, and the floor groaned beneath me, a low, complaining moan that seemed alive. Light from the hallway outside barely reached in, but enough to reveal shapes beneath the decay. Chairs draped in white sheets, their corners stiff and pointed like frozen fingers. I ran my hand along a banister. The wood was rough, splintered, yet the craftsmanship was undeniable. There had been care here once, pride, but time had claimed it. The walls were streaked with watermarks, yellowed ribbons spiraling down into the darkness. I thought I saw a shadow move along the far wall, but when I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the fading light. I wanted to believe it. The first room I entered was a parlor. Dust motes swirled in the thin shafts of light, catching on my jacket as if trying to hold me in place. A grand piano sat in the corner, keys yellowed and cracked. I pressed one with a tentative finger. The note echoed far longer than it should have, like the house had absorbed it and returned it with its own resonance. I jumped back, heart hammering. There was no one here, or so I thought. I noticed the furniture first. The couch and chairs, though draped and abandoned, were arranged with a precision that felt deliberate. It was as if someone had left in a hurry but wanted the room to retain its dignity. A small table held a porcelain tea set, dusty but unbroken. The cups were turned upside down like an attempt to hide something. I crouched closer, wiping a thin layer of dust from a plate. Faded fingerprints smudged the surface. Someone had been here after all. But who? And why did the air feel charged? Like a warning I didn't want to hear. Curtains hung in tatters along the windows, torn in jagged lines that let streaks of gray light through. The fabric was so fragile I almost expected it to crumble to dust at my touch. But behind the tiers I saw symbols scratched into the walls. Strange markings, angular and uneven, like someone had traced them with trembling hands. They weren't letters I recognized. They weren't numbers either. My stomach clenched. I knew instinctively these were not ordinary doodles left by children. I moved slowly, careful not to disturb anything more than I had to. Every step felt amplified, my boots echoing across the wood, though the echo didn't seem quite right, too delayed, almost mocking. I glanced over my shoulder, certain I'd glimpsed movement in the corner. There was nothing, but the sense of being watched had settled deep in my chest, crawling over my ribs like a living thing. The hallway stretched before me, lined with doorways to rooms I hadn't explored. Some doors were closed tightly, others hung ajar, revealing slivers of darkness within. I noticed the floors here were uneven, warped by decades of moisture. My foot caught on a rise in the wood and I stumbled. The sound was loud in the silence, and for a second I thought I heard breathing in response. Sharp, shallow, and deliberate. I froze, listening. The sound stopped, leaving only the creak of the old house settling. In one room I found a set of chairs around a table. Papers littered the surface, brittle and yellowed. I picked one up. The handwriting was elegant, cursive, precise, but the words didn't make sense. They spiraled across the page, letters overlapping, forming shapes I couldn't read. It was like someone had written and rewritten the message over and over, obsessively. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Who had cared enough to leave this behind, and why? The farther I moved, the more I noticed the details that didn't belong. Footprints in dust, faint but visible, leading from room to room and then vanishing mid-floor. A chair slightly rotated from where it should have been. A curtain fluttering, though there was no draft. The house was alive in subtle ways, breathing through the decay, shifting when I wasn't looking directly. And I felt it, like it was testing me, watching how far I would go. I stopped in front of a tall mirror. The glass was dulled, marred with age, but my reflection stared back with the same dread I felt inside. For a moment the image flickered, and I thought I saw another figure behind me. My heart skipped. I turned quickly. The hallway was empty. The air was thick with a smell I couldn't place, something metallic, sharp, almost like iron mixed with candle smoke. I took a slow breath, convincing myself it was imagination. But the instinct to flee had started to gnaw at me. The walls seemed to pulse slightly, shadows shifting when I looked away. I realized the markings I had seen earlier were repeated throughout the manor, hidden in corners and behind furniture, etched into moldings and paneling. They were everywhere, tracing the architecture like veins. It was as if the house had a language and I had stumbled into its conversation. The thought was unbearable. I wanted to understand, but I didn't want to know. In a study, books lined shelves that sagged under decades of neglect. I ran a finger along the spines, lifting a single volume. Dust exploded into the air. The pages inside were blank except for one small drawing at the back. A simple symbol, a circle enclosing 3 jagged lines. I shivered. It matched one of the markings I had seen earlier. Someone or something had left messages throughout the house, and I was reading them, slowly, deliberately. I moved to the next room, a dining hall, and stopped. The table was set as though awaiting guests. Plates, forks, glasses, all perfectly placed. Dust covered everything, yet there was a faint outline where a hand or a face might have brushed the surface. I felt a tightening in my chest, an irrational sense of wrongness. I pressed my hand to the wood, and the imprint of warmth, or something that had been warm, lingered in my mind. My mind screamed at me to leave, but my feet wouldn't obey. A doorway at the far end of the hall led to a smaller room. The door was ajar, and inside, a single chair faced the wall. On the chair sat a doll, its eyes black voids staring past me. The doll's dress was tattered, and the fabric smelled faintly of smoke. I leaned closer. Etched into the floor beneath it were more markings, arranged in a circle. I had no idea what it meant, but I felt the urge to step back. A memory, vague and wrong, whispered at the edge of my mind. Children laughing, doors slamming, someone whispering my name. I turned to leave the room. The chair rocked slightly, though I had not touched it. My pulse quickened. The air felt electric, the smell stronger, almost suffocating. I swallowed hard, trying to calm my shaking hands. Every instinct told me I was not alone. I couldn't see anything, but the presence was undeniable, patient, watching. I backed through the hall, every door I passed showing signs of life and absence. Footsteps, dust disturbed, furniture slightly moved. The house had left clues of someone or something recently active within it. I realized then that the house wasn't abandoned. It was dormant, waiting, and I had walked straight into its attention. The last room I examined before retreating was the ballroom. The ceiling arched high above, lost in shadows. Chandeliers hung, crystals missing or dulled, catching stray light in fractured patterns. The floorboards were scarred and worn. At first glance it seemed empty, but then I noticed them, footprints leading toward the center of the room, then abruptly stopping mid-stride. And the air carried it, whispers, so faint I could barely hear, curling through the space like smoke. Names, words, indistinct, urgent. I didn't stay to listen. My body pulled toward the hallway, toward the exit, but I took one last glance. The shadows in the ballroom seemed to shift and gather near the far wall as if beckoning me. And I knew, without understanding, that the house remembered everything. Every touch, every whisper, every presence. And now it remembered me. I left the room, retracing my steps through the hall, careful not to disturb more than I already had. Every creak, every flutter of curtain, every shifting shadow pressed in on me. By the time I reached the front door, the fog outside had thickened, swallowing the hill and obscuring the manor in a gray haze. I stepped onto the threshold and looked back. The house sat silently, vast and patient, as though aware I was leaving, but not yet finished with me. And I knew, as my boots crunched on the gravel descending the hill, that I had left with more questions than answers. Every marking, every footprint, every whispered word was a puzzle I couldn't ignore. Something waited in that house, something deliberate, and it would not forget me. The sun had vanished completely when I realized I wasn't just in darkness. I was swallowed by it. Shadows stretched across the manor like living things, crawling along the walls, pooling at corners, and retreating when I looked directly at them. Every surface, every piece of furniture, became a potential hiding place. The hallway I had walked confidently in daylight now seemed endless, folding back on itself in ways my eyes refused to accept. I took a step forward and the floor creaked underfoot, a sharp complaint in the silence. My own breathing sounded wrong, amplified, uneven. Somewhere deep inside me, a part that had been quietly skeptical all afternoon began to panic. I was alone, yes, but alone didn't feel safe anymore. Not with the way the shadows lingered longer than they should, not with the way the walls seemed to hum faintly beneath my skin. I passed the parlor again. The moonlight through the broken curtains cast jagged shapes across the carpet, and I swore I saw a figure hunched over the sofa. It disappeared when I blinked. My stomach twisted. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a leftover imprint of memory in the dust. But then a soft whisper rose, almost drowned in the wind through cracked windows, brushing against my ears. A syllable I couldn't place, a word I didn't know, but it was deliberate. Someone or something was speaking. I kept moving, forcing my legs to obey, though my senses screamed at me to stop. Every step brought new sounds. A distant thud, the soft scrape of something across wood, the faintest sigh that seemed almost human. I stopped and strained my ears. Nothing, and yet everything. The house was alive in the smallest ways, breathing around me, watching. The hairs on my neck rose. I pressed my palm against the wall, feeling the plaster cool and rough under my fingers, and tried to convince myself that it was all ordinary decay, ordinary silence, ordinary fear. At the end of the hallway, a staircase descended into darkness. I hadn't noticed it before. The wood was worn and polished smooth, slick in the dim light. I gripped the railing and listened. The house was whispering again, low voices echoing slightly as if carried through tunnels beneath the floorboards. They were murmurs of memory, fragments of the past, laughter, arguments, cries. Some voices were faint, distant. Others were sharper, closer, as if right behind me. I took the first step down. My foot hit the stair with a hollow sound. A draft brushed past my face, cold and carrying the scent of damp earth and mold. The deeper I went, the more the whispers seemed to focus, turning toward me, circling like a predator deciding whether to engage or retreat. I felt my pulse thumping in my throat, each beat echoing in the empty halls above. In the corner of the staircase, a shadow moved independently of the light. It was quick, a flicker at first, then deliberate. A shape crouched low, skimming the edge of the wall, disappearing when I blinked. I froze. My mouth went dry. I told myself it couldn't be real, yet my instinct screamed otherwise. There was no way something that small and deliberate could exist in the absence of life. The thought should have terrified me more, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. At the bottom, the floor opened into a wide foyer. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their crystals dulled with dust. Moonlight fractured through them in jagged beams, casting spires of shadow across the floor. I walked slowly, dragging my fingers along the wall, listening to the soft, almost imperceptible sounds, scraping, sighing, and sometimes laughter. A child's laughter, I couldn't tell. It echoed from nowhere and everywhere, then vanished, leaving only the silence and the pressure of being watched. I reached the library. The shelves were lined with books whose spines were cracked and peeling, the titles long forgotten. I touched one at random and a small plume of dust erupted into the air. As it settled, I noticed faint footprints in the dust along the floorboards leading toward the corner. They weren't mine. They weren't old. Someone or something had been here recently. I swallowed hard, a chill spiraling down my spine. The footprints ended abruptly, as though the being that had made them had vanished mid-step. A floorboard groaned nearby. I spun around, catching a flicker of movement. Nothing, but the shadows had changed. They were gathering, pooling along the walls, stretching longer and darker than before. I felt a tug at my awareness, like the house itself was testing me. My hand brushed against a bookshelf, and it shifted slightly under my fingers, though it hadn't been touched in years, or so I wanted to believe. I tried to convince myself to move on, to keep going, but the sense of something waiting, something deliberate, pressed on me. I forced my legs forward and entered a long corridor lined with mirrors. My reflection was faint, blurred by years of neglect, but for a moment I saw another figure behind me. I turned sharply. The corridor was empty. I exhaled shakily. My reflection returned to normal, or as normal as it could be in a house that warped perception like this. The corridor ended at a door. It was slightly ajar, revealing a room swallowed by darkness. A faint sound came from inside, a scraping, rhythmic and deliberate. I stepped closer. The closer I got, the clearer it became that the sound was not random. Someone had moved through this room recently, and I wasn't imagining it. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. Dust swirled in the moonlight, disturbed by what? I crouched and examined the floor. Footprints, smaller than mine, pressed into the thin layer of dust. They led to the center of the room, then vanished. My skin prickled. How could someone or something walk across this room and leave no trace beyond a sudden stop? My hands shook as I traced the prints, half expecting them to disappear beneath my touch. The whispers returned, louder now, surrounding me, coming from walls, floor, and ceiling simultaneously. Words overlapped, fragments of sentences. Don't leave, watch, follow, remember. The voices were not human alone, not entirely. There was something unnatural, something patient and deliberate, curling around my awareness like smoke, pressing closer, yet never fully revealing itself. I stumbled back into the hallway, needing air, needing distance. My eyes darted along the walls, counting shadows, watching corners. Every surface seemed to breathe. Every shadow stretched and shifted as if alive. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the house's emptiness with the undeniable evidence of life or presence that I could not place. I paused by a window. Outside, the night was thick and silent, the fog rolling across the hills like a slow tide. Yet inside, the house murmured, whispered, sighed. And I realized as I pressed my palm to the cool glass that the house had been awake long before I arrived. It had remembered everyone who had walked its halls, and now it remembered me. A sudden movement caught my eye, a shadow crossing behind the far wall. I spun, empty corridor, my pulse thundered, the whispers had stopped. But in the sudden silence I felt it. A presence crouched just out of sight, observing, patient, deliberate. It did not hide, it did not move, it simply waited. I walked slowly, trying to maintain control, but every creak, every displaced sheet, every flutter of curtain made my stomach churn. The house was aware of me, aware of my fear, feeding off it subtly, like a predator savoring the first signs of prey. Every step forward was both exploration and surrender, each movement a risk. In the final hallway, I came upon a mirror once more. My reflection stared back, but behind me, faintly in the depths of the glass, I saw shapes moving, silhouettes of people or maybe shadows pressed against the walls, bending and shifting unnaturally. I blinked. They were gone. Only my reflection remained. My heart refused to slow. I reached the end of the hall and leaned against the wall for a moment, listening. Whispers lingered still, curling around the edges of my mind. I had no idea what they wanted, or why the house had chosen to show me this. All I knew was that the manor was alive in ways I could neither predict nor escape. Every shadow, every sound, every fleeting movement had a purpose, and I had walked right into its gaze. Stepping back into the larger hall, I realized that nightfall had changed the manor entirely. What had seemed abandoned in daylight was now a maze of whispers, shadows, and unseen observers. And though I had not seen anyone, or anything, directly, I felt every movement of the house as though it were breathing over my shoulder, tracking me, testing me. I tried to leave, but each hallway felt longer than the last, doors shifting, rooms folding into each other. I knew, without needing to see, that the manor had no intention of letting me go easily, and I understood in the quiet dread pooling in my chest that this night had only just begun. I found the candle almost by accident. It wasn't sitting on a shelf or in a drawer, not in any obvious place. It was tucked into the corner of the attic, coated in dust, leaning against a beam as though it had been waiting for me to notice. My fingers brushed it, and the wax was cold, stiff, brittle. I struck a match from a box I had in my pocket, shaking as I did it. The flame flickered, hesitant and then steadied, casting long, trembling shadows across the attic walls. The light revealed shapes I hadn't noticed in the dim gloom. Stacks of boxes, forgotten furniture, cobwebs hung like drapes. But there was something more, something deliberate. At the far end of the attic, a faint outline of a door had been hidden by shadows, small and unassuming, but the candle illuminated it, every line sharp, precise. My heart hammered. I hadn't seen that door in daylight. Had it been there all along, or had it appeared now, guided by the flame? I approached it slowly, each step measured, careful not to disturb the brittle floorboards. The air smelled of damp wood and something metallic, faint, like rusted iron. I reached for the doorknob. Cold, too cold. My hand recoiled. Then, as if compelled by some unseen force, I grasped it again and turned. The door opened with a whispering creak, and I was greeted by a narrow chamber, walls blackened by soot and time. The candlelight revealed the room's contents, strange, unsettling, yet unmistakably human. A small table stood in the center, arranged like a shrine. Candles, long burned down to stubs, circled a pile of objects, photographs, letters, trinkets. Everything was coated in dust, but it felt recent. I bent closer. The photographs were torn at the edges, faces obscured, but the expressions lingered, smiles, laughter, sadness. One photo caught my eye. A man staring straight at the camera, dark eyes piercing. And for a brief heartbeat, I felt them on me. Not just in the photo, but in the room, in the very air. The letters were fragile, the ink faded. I unfolded one carefully, reading fragments. They come when the candles burn low, another. Do not look behind the walls, my stomach churned. The words didn't explain. They hinted, warning, and left gaps that my mind immediately filled with dread. Someone had been here, perhaps recently. Someone or something had been using this chamber for purposes I couldn't yet grasp. I moved the candle and the shadows shifted unnaturally, stretching toward the walls, curling around corners, pooling near the ceiling. The attic seemed larger and smaller all at once. I stepped back and the floorboards groaned underfoot. I wasn't alone. Not entirely. The air shifted, carrying a whisper or maybe the echo of one just behind the walls. Do not burn the last candle. My pulse spiked. I looked at the flame. It trembled as though resisting the darkness that pressed in from the corners of the chamber. The air smelled sharper now, the metallic scent of old iron stronger. My gaze traveled across the room. A small cabinet, barely noticeable, stood against the far wall. Its door was slightly open, revealing a collection of objects. A locket, a set of keys, a tarnished knife. Each item was placed deliberately enough that it felt like a ritual. But to what end, I had no clue. The candle flickered violently, shadows dancing wildly. My mind raced. Could this place have been used recently? The dust had patterns, footprints perhaps, too faint to recognize fully, but enough to make me question every sound I had heard in the manor. Every floorboard creak, every whisper, every shadow that hadn't belonged to me. Could it have come from here? I took a tentative step closer to the cabinet. The candlelight revealed strange markings on the wall behind it, scratches, symbols, words half carved into the plaster. I crouched, inspecting them. They weren't in any language I knew. The shapes were familiar, though patterns I'd seen in dreams, recurring, twisted into impossible forms. And then the whispers returned, overlapping, urgent, as if reading the symbols along with me. Do not stay, one voice hissed. They are coming, another added. The air grew colder. I wrapped my hands around the candle, trying to anchor myself, but the flame dipped and danced, casting the chamber in a fleeting, wavering light. My eyes adjusted, and I noticed a small trapdoor in the floor, previously invisible. It was sealed with a simple latch, but scratch marks around it suggested recent tampering. My gut twisted. The candle illuminated the trapdoor's edges in a circle of gold-orange light, almost inviting me, almost daring me to open it. I wanted to stop, wanted to run, but curiosity and fear pushed me forward. My hand hovered over the latch. The flame sputtered. Behind me, a floorboard groaned. I froze. Nothing moved, yet the presence of another or others was undeniable. I dared a glance over my shoulder. Shadows clung to the far corners, motionless, patient. I felt their gaze. And then a soft exhale. The air shifted, warm and wet against my skin like breath. I opened the trapdoor slowly. Darkness gaped at me, thick and almost tactile. A faint smell rose from below, earth damp, something that belonged neither to this house nor to the world above. The whispers swelled, unintelligible now, urgent, insistent. My legs quivered. I lowered the candle into the opening and the shadows stretched downward, wrapping around the edges, pressing close, hungry. The light revealed steps, narrow, worn, leading down. I wanted to hesitate. I wanted to stop and leave, but my body moved before my mind could catch up. Each step groaned under my weight. The candle's flame trembled with each motion, shadows leaping along the walls, forming shapes that seemed to watch me, following, waiting. My chest ached with a mixture of fear and anticipation. At the bottom, I entered a small chamber. The walls were damp stone, and the air was heavier here, oppressive, tasting faintly of iron. Objects were arranged with ritualistic precision. More photographs, small statues, trinkets I couldn't identify, and a single chair in the center. On the chair lay an open book. Its pages were filled with symbols and drawings that twisted and writhed in the candlelight, impossible shapes that my eyes couldn't fully comprehend. I bent to look closer. The whispers intensified, circling me. The flame flickered violently, and then I saw it, an impression in the dust, a footprint too large for a child, too small for an adult, leading to the chair and stopping just short. No one was there now, but the mark was fresh. Someone or something had been here, seated in that chair, and they had left, leaving only the sense of their presence behind. A sudden draft snuffed the candle briefly. I froze, heart hammering. When the flame returned, the shadows shifted again. The symbols on the walls seemed to move, ever so slightly, as though breathing in time with me. The book on the chair was open to a page that hadn't been there before, and I could read a single line, scrawled hastily. "The last candle sees all." I stumbled back. My mind reeled. The room was alive, not with movement, but with awareness. It had watched me, had guided me here. And the candle, my single candle, was the conduit, the key, the witness. I wanted to drop it, to run, but I couldn't. It was the only thing keeping me from being swallowed by the dark, only thing giving me sight, only thing tethering me to the reality I still recognized. The whispers became coherent then, voices overlapping, layering over each other, fragments of conversation, laughter, screams. Names I didn't know, words I didn't understand. And then a pause, silence. My pulse roared in my ears. The shadows hung in place, expectant, patient. And I realized the candle could not last forever. Every flicker, every breath, every heartbeat drew the light closer to its end. I looked around the chamber, absorbing the objects, the symbols, the footprints, the book. A single thought burned through my mind. What happens when the candle dies? When the last flame goes out, does the room forget me? Or does it finally step fully into the world above, following me, waiting for me to return? The thought made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, to flee, but my body was rigid. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet curiosity, horror, and some unnameable compulsion kept me rooted in place. The chamber held me. The candle held me. The shadows, the whispers, and the dark beyond them waited. I felt their awareness brushing against me, pressing close, like breath on my neck. I wanted to move, but couldn't. I wanted to drop the candle, but feared what would happen if I did. And in that moment, I understood. The house, the chamber, the last candle, they were not just remnants of the past. They were alive, patient, and they had been waiting for someone to light the flame, someone to witness. I did not know if I would leave the manor that night. I did not know if I would leave at all. But the candle burned on, flickering, casting shadows that twisted and writhed, revealing truths I was not yet ready to name. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the house had not finished showing me its secrets.